The first thing the Coorong Saline Wetlands give you is a pale, briny hush, stretched beside South Australia's coast like a long silver breath. Settle into the sound of this journey and let it move slowly. We are only arriving at the edge, where the air smells of salt and damp sand, and the light lies low across water that is never quite sea, never quite lake, and never quite river. You can feel that strangeness before you understand it, as if the whole place is holding one quiet question. Here, the Coorong Saline Wetlands rest behind the Young Husband Peninsula, that narrow arm of dunes between lagoon and Southern Ocean. On one side, waves keep folding onto the beach with a softened roar. On the other, the lagoon lies flatter, calmer, more secretive. You stand with me in the faint wind, and the water seems to look back without moving much at all. It is shallow, but it feels deep in time. It is open, but it feels enclosed. The Coorong is strange because it is a place of meetings, and none of those meetings are simple. A May down from the Murray, carrying the inland with it, brown and mineral-rich and slow from a journey across dry country. Seawater presses near the mouth, tasting of tides and weather. Rain falls lightly in its season, and groundwater seeps in with its own hidden chemistry. When you breathe in, you almost sense those waters layered inside the air, fresh, brackish, saline, and sometimes almost bitter with salt. We begin near the Murray mouth, where the river's long story reaches the sea. The sand here is never just a boundary. It shifts, closes, opens, narrows, and changes its mind under wind and current. You can imagine the mouth as a low, breathing passage, sometimes wide enough for water to move freely, sometimes needing help to stay open. Nothing about it feels fixed. Even the edge of the map feels soft. As we drift beside the Coorong, the land becomes spare and quiet. Low dunes carry grasses that bend in the wind. Samphire spreads in muted reds and greens across the salt marsh, like a soft woven mat pressed close to the earth. The smell is clean and mineral, with a dry sharpness from salt and a faint organic warmth from mud. Under your feet, the ground can feel firm one moment and yielding the next, as though the wetland is gently remembering water. The lagoon runs for a long distance, narrow and patient, parallel to the sea. That is one of its oddest beauties. Most wetlands widen, branch, or gather themselves into rounded basins, but the Coorong stretches like a ribbon drawn by wind and old waves. You can look along it and feel the distance thinning away into haze. The water does not hurry. It lies in elongated pools and channels, carrying reflections of pale sky, reeds, birds, and the faint line of dune. You may notice that the Coorong does not announce itself with lushness. It isn't a green, overflowing swamp. It is more austere than that, more finely balanced. The colors are gentle and restrained: gray-blue water, white salt, brown reeds, pink samphire, and sand with the color of old bone. Yet the longer we stay, the more alive it becomes. Stillness, here, is not emptiness. It is simply life moving at a slower scale. This is why the place can feel so strange in the body. Your eyes expect water to mean softness, abundance, and easy freshness. But the Coorong offers water that can be more saline than the sea, especially farther along the southern lagoon when evaporation has done its quiet work. The sun lifts water away, grain by invisible grain, and leaves salt behind. The wind keeps touching the surface. The lagoon concentrates itself. We move now from the open mouth toward the long inner waters, and as we go, the Coorong begins to explain itself by changing under us. The first change is subtle, almost like the cooling of a room after sunset. Near the northern end, the Coorong still remembers the Murray, the lakes, and the pulse of estuary water. The channels around the mouth can carry a mixed taste, neither fully marine nor fully fresh. You can picture this water against your skin as faintly slick, cool, and restless. It has come from many directions. It has not yet settled into one identity. The science of this mixing is gentle but intricate. Fresh water is lighter than salt water, and seawater has a heavier, denser feel as it moves in through the mouth. Wind can stir these layers together, while tide and river flow decide how long any mixture lasts. In a deep estuary, Those layers might sit one above another with a clearer structure, but the Coorong is shallow, long and exposed, so its chemistry can change with weather, season, and the angle of the wind. You can hear that shallowness in the small sounds around you. Water taps softly against reeds. Fine ripples travel a long way across the lagoon before fading. A bird lifts from a mudflat, and the wing beats seem unusually clear in the open air. There are no cliffs to throw the sound back. There is only low land, wide sky, and the faint hush of the Southern Ocean beyond the dunes. Because the Coorong is long and narrow, distance itself becomes a kind of instrument. Water at one end can behave differently from water far away, even though it belongs to the same lagoon. Salinity climbs as you move southward. Nutrients settle, shift, and return. Shallow basins warm quickly under the sun and cool quickly under night air. When you walk beside it, you are walking along a living gradient, not a single uniform sheet of water. That gradient is one reason the wetland holds such unusual life. Some creatures favor the milder brackish stretches, where fish can move through channels and feed along the edges. Others tolerate stronger salt and make use of places that would feel severe to softer plants and animals. Tiny invertebrates live in mud and weed beds, shaping the food web from below. You may not see them at first, but the birds do. The whole surface is being read by beaks, feet, and patient eyes. The Coorong's famous birds are part of that quiet reading. Pelicans rest in pale groups like folded sails. Stilts and sandpipers step lightly along the shallows. Migratory shorebirds arrive from astonishing distances, yet here we describe them without haste, because in this place even great journeys seem to end in careful, delicate feeding. You notice the small movements first, a head dipping, a foot testing mud, a ripple spreading outward from a thin leg. There is comfort in that attention. The Coorong asks nothing dramatic from its creatures. It asks for timing, tolerance, and patience. It asks them to know when the water has lowered, when a mudflat has softened, when a patch of submerged plants has returned, when the salt has become too much, and another basin might be kinder. As we watch, you can feel the wetland teaching a slow kind of awareness, the kind that notices change before it needs a name. And as we follow the lagoon farther from the Murray mouth, the water grows more inward, more saline, and more quietly unusual. Now the Coorong saline wetlands begin to feel like a long evaporating mirror. The air seems drier here, even beside water. Salt gathers in pale edges where the shallows retreat, tracing the shoreline like a delicate crust. If you kneel close in your imagination, you can smell warm mud, sharp brine, and the faint grassy scent of samphire in the breeze. The light has a white, reflective softness. It makes everything seem both near and far away. Evaporation is the slow engine of this strangeness. Water leaves the lagoon as vapor, lifted by sun and wind, but the dissolved salts remain behind. If enough fresh water arrives, the salt is diluted and moved. If less arrives, the lagoon grows stronger in salinity, especially in the long southern reaches where exchange with the sea is limited. There is no drama in the process. It is quiet arithmetic, written across months and years. You can feel that arithmetic in the margins. A shallow pool becomes slightly shallower, a ribbon of exposed sediment widens, a patch of saltbush brightens under dry light. The wetland does not transform all at once, but by degrees so small they feel like breathing. And because the Coorong is so shallow, a small change in level can reveal a wide new surface of mud, sand, or salt-polished ground. These exposed places matter. Mudflats are not empty surfaces. They hold worms, small crustaceans, insect larvae, microorganisms, and films of algae so thin they may appear only as a sheen. When your gaze softens, the mud becomes a table laid for feeding birds. Every tiny track has a reason. Every faint bubble has a source. The stillness is full of hidden work, most of it taking place below the smooth skin of sediment. In some years and seasons, submerged plants become especially important. Ruppia, a salt-tolerant aquatic plant, can grow in the Coorong's brackish and saline waters when conditions allow. Its stems and seed heads provide structure in a landscape that otherwise seems open and bare. Around it, small animals gather, and birds follow the food that follows the plants. You might imagine your hand passing through that underwater meadow, feeling soft stems bend and release in the greenish light. But the Coorong is delicate because each part depends on timing. If water stays too salty for too long, some plants struggle. If levels rise or fall at the wrong moment, seeds may not set or germinate as they need to. If the mouth closes or exchange weakens, the chemistry can shift again. The wetland's strangeness is not just that it is salty, it is that salt, depth, wind, river flow, and season are all speaking at once. We do not need to solve that conversation tonight, we only listen to it. The Coorong has been shaped by older coastlines, drifting sand, river mouths, storm waves, and dry inland weather. It belongs to the edge between continent and ocean, where nothing stays pure for very long. You can rest in that thought, because mixed places often have their own peace. They do not need to choose one thing to be. Below this softer brightness, as we keep moving along the lagoon, the land narrows around us and the wetland becomes a corridor of wind, water, birds, and salt. The Young Husband Peninsula is close now in our imagining, a long dune barrier holding the Southern Ocean just out of sight. You hear the surf as a low, continuous murmur beyond the sand. It is not loud from here. It is more like distant breath, rising and falling behind the still lagoon. Between that ocean sound and the quiet water beside us, the Coorong feels suspended, as if it has been placed between two kinds of sleep. This barrier is one of the great reasons the Coorong feels so unlike other wetlands. The peninsula shelters the lagoon from the full force of the sea, but it does not separate it completely from marine influence. Sand moves along the coast, wind reshapes the dunes, storms and tides press at the openings. The lagoon lies protected, but never isolated. It is a narrow room beside a restless ocean, and the wall is made of sand. You can picture the dunes under evening light, their slopes cooled by shadow and their ridges touched with gold. Marram grass, coastal shrubs, and low plants hold the sand where they can. The air smells of salt spray, dry grass, and sun-warmed grains. If you step carefully, the sand gives softly underfoot. Each footprint is temporary. The next wind will smooth it away without effort. Behind the dunes, the lagoon receives a softer version of ocean weather. Salt arrives indirectly, through the mouth, through spray, through groundwater, through the long memory of marine influence. Freshness arrives indirectly too, by river flow, rainfall, and seepage. This makes the Coorong a place of partial arrivals. Everything comes softened, filtered, delayed, and altered. Even the ocean reaches it as a whisper. That whisper helps shape habitats in narrow bands. There are open water stretches, sand flats, mud flats, salt marsh, reeds, samphire flats, and ephemeral wetlands that appear and fade with rain. One step inland may change the plants under your feet. One small rise may escape flooding. One shallow depression may hold brine long after the sky has cleared. The Coorong's variety is quiet, close to the ground, and easy to miss unless we move slowly. The birds understand these small differences. They choose edges with care. Pelicans may gather where fish are available, while waders search the softer margins. Terns hover and turn over open water. Swans and ducks use calmer reaches when conditions suit them. A distant flock can look like ash scattered across the shine of the lagoon, then suddenly become many bodies, each with its own small hunger and perfect balance. There is something soothing about a place that works by gradients rather than boundaries. You are not asked to cross from one world into another all at once. Fresh becomes brackish, brackish becomes saline, wet mud becomes damp sand becomes dry dune. The Coorong lets each condition lean into the next, and your thoughts can do the same, loosening their edges as the light lowers. And as the light lowers further over the Coorong, we move toward the parts of the wetland where strangeness becomes almost luminous. In certain shallow waters, the color can shift in ways that feel dreamlike. The Coorong may hold pale blue, milky green, tea brown, silver, or rose-tinted reflections, depending on depth. Algae, sediment, sky, and salt. Nothing about the color is decorative. It is chemistry and life made visible. You watch the surface change with the angle of the sun, and the lagoon seems to become a different place without moving. Hypersaline wetlands often carry a special brightness. Salt crystals scatter light. Shallow water reflects more sky than depth. Algal films can tint the margins, while exposed sediment dries into pale plates and curling edges. The effect is quiet but uncanny, as if the landscape has been gently bleached by time. You can feel the cool wind on your cheeks, and the faint sting of salt in the air, and the soft grit of sand against your shoes. This is not the lush strangeness of a rainforest or reef. It is a thinner beauty. It leaves space around every detail. A single feather on wet sand becomes noticeable. A line of bird tracks seems carefully written. A low plant with red stems glows against grey mud. When there is less visual abundance, the mind settles on smaller things, and smaller things begin to feel vast. The science beneath these colors is calm and patient. Salinity affects which algae and microbes can live in the water. Nutrients influence growth and cloudiness. Wind can stir sediments from the shallow bottom, turning clear water opaque. In warm, still periods, biological changes can happen quickly, though the landscape itself appears quiet. The Coorong teaches us that still-looking water may be very busy inside. You may notice how this changes the feeling of depth. The Coorong is shallow, but its processes feel deep because they are layered in time. Ancient coastal sands lie beneath recent mud. Old river behavior meets modern water regulation. Seasonal rainfall meets evaporation that repeats every dry period. Bird migrations connect this quiet shore to places far away. As we stand here, the lagoon is both local and immense. The word strange begins to soften in this light. It no longer means odd in a sharp way. It means finely made, difficult to simplify, and full of conditions that overlap without blending completely. The Coorong is strange the way twilight is strange. Neither day nor night, but a long passage between them. You can rest there. A passage does not need to hurry. When the wind drops, the wetland becomes almost reflective enough to hold the whole sky. The distant ocean continues beyond the dunes, but here the water only trembles. You can imagine your breathing matching that tremble, slight and even. The salt smell remains. The air cools. Birds settle into lower calls. The Coorong receives the evening without ceremony, as if it has been receiving evenings for a very long time. And as evening gathers across the saline water, we drift toward the life that depends on these delicate changes. The small lives that make the quiet surface matter. The small lives of the Coorong saline wetlands are easy to pass over because so many of them live beneath surfaces that look still. You look across the lagoon and see water, mud, a few birds, and wind-creased reflections. But under that quiet skin, tiny animals are moving through grains of sediment, grazing on films of algae, resting in burrows, and rising when the water softens enough. The wetland's abundance is often hidden in miniature. You begin to notice the feeding birds first, because they reveal what the eye cannot see. A sandpiper places its feet with the care of a needle touching cloth. A stilt lowers its long bill and stirs the shallows with a motion so slight it barely disturbs the light. Nearby, a duck tips forward, tail lifted, searching through cloudy water. Each movement tells you there is food here, though the lagoon appears almost empty. In a wetland like the Coorong, the base of life is often soft and small. Algae grow as films across mud, as greenish threads in shallow water, or as microscopic cells drifting with light. Bacteria and other microbes recycle nutrients, making old material available again. Invertebrates feed, burrow, filter, and graze, turning the lagoon floor into a living surface. You may not hear them, but their work gives weight to the silence. The water itself decides who can stay. In places where salinity is moderate, more kinds of fish and invertebrates may find shelter and food. In stronger brine, only more tolerant species remain, and the food web becomes simpler, though not lifeless. This is one of the Coorong's quiet mysteries. As conditions grow harsher in chemical terms, the landscape can still support life adapted to narrow windows of possibility. You can imagine placing your hand just above the mud, without touching it. The air is cool now, but the sediment still holds the day's warmth. A faint sulfur note rises where organic matter breaks down without much oxygen. Salt dries at the edge in delicate grains. A tiny ripple touches the shore, then slips back. Everything is small enough to miss, and yet the whole wetland depends on it. The Coorong saline wetlands are strange because they make importance look plain. There are no towering trees here to announce an ecosystem. There are no lush canopies or dramatic waterfalls. Instead, the place works through thin films, shallow pools, exposed flats, and the careful timing of breeding, feeding, flowering, and drying. It asks you to lower your expectations of grandeur until a square of mud becomes a world. When birds gather in large numbers, the hidden food web becomes visible for a while. A flock may settle across a flat, like a soft shifting pattern. Their calls blend into small whistles, murmurs, and wing sounds. No single bird needs to dominate the scene. Together, they become an instrument of the wetland, rising and settling in response to water levels, weather, and the unseen distribution of food beneath their feet. Some of these birds connect the Coorong to distant wetlands across the world. Migratory shorebirds may travel from northern breeding grounds to southern feeding places, following a chain of suitable habitats. When they stand here, feeding in the saline shallows, they carry more geography than their bodies seem able to hold. You watch one small bird step through the water, and for a moment, the Coorong feels joined to hemispheres. But we stay with the quiet fact of the bird in front of us. Its legs make thin reflections. Its bill touches the water, lifts, and touches again. The light around it is silver now, and the air has lost the day's heat. Far beyond the dunes, the ocean continues its soft repeating breath. Here beside the lagoon, the bird feeds as if the whole evening has been made for patient attention. That patience belongs to the plants as well. Along the margins of the Coorong, salt marsh species live with flooding, drying, and salinity that would trouble many softer plants. Samphire, with its jointed stems and low dense growth, can hold color even in austere light. It may look simple, but it is finely adapted to salt. You can see its reds and greens deepening as the sun lowers, like embers with no heat. Salt-tolerant plants do not resist the wetland's character so much as join it. Some manage salt by storing it, excluding it, or living where inundation is seasonal rather than constant. Their roots help bind sediment. Their stems slow water and catch fine particles. In places, they create low shelter for insects and small animals. The Coorong's edges are not borders only. They are working zones of exchange. If you listen closely, the salt marsh has its own soft sound. Wind moves through low stems with a dry whisper. Small insects tick or rustle in the vegetation. Water seeps quietly through the mud when a wavelet arrives and withdraws. The smell is earthy, saline, and faintly green, a mixture of plant tissue, mineral crust, and damp sediment. It is not lush, but it is deeply alive. The longer we remain beside the Coorong Saline Wetlands, the more the word wetland becomes complicated. Some places are flooded, some only damp, some dry at the surface but shaped by water below. Some basins hold water after rain, then vanish into cracked clay and salt. The wetland exists not as one permanent state, but as a pattern of returning conditions. It is a verb as much as a place. That is part of its strangeness. The Coorong can look quietest when it is changing most. A hot week can draw the shoreline back. A cool, wet spell can reconnect pools. A wind from one direction can push shallow water into one margin, while another wind exposes it. Because the lagoon is so flat, a slight shift may rearrange feeding grounds for birds and living space for plants. You may feel your own thoughts becoming flatter and wider here. There is something restful about a landscape that does not perform itself quickly. It gives itself in degrees. First the salt smell, then the pale water, then the birds, then the tiny evidence in mud, then the understanding that the whole system is moving slowly, even when your eyes can barely catch it. The Coorong teaches by subtlety, and as we move with that subtlety, The next part of the wetland begins where water and time have shaped one another for longer than memory can easily hold. The Coorong saline wetlands are not only an ecosystem of the present, they are also a record of older shores, older river mouths, and older arrangements of sand and sea. The long lagoon and dune barrier did not appear in a single season. They formed through coastal processes that gathered, shifted, and held sediment over thousands of years. When you look along the peninsula, you are seeing the ocean's slow handwriting. Waves carry sand along the coast. Wind lifts dry grains and lays them in dunes. Storms reshape shorelines, while quieter periods allow vegetation to hold the sand more firmly. Behind these ridges, water becomes sheltered enough for lagoons and wetlands to form. The Coorong's long, narrow body is partly a gift of this barrier, because the sea built a wall that was never fully a wall. It is porous in history, if not always in sight. You can feel that oldness in the sand. It is fine and pale, cool near the surface after sunset, warmer just below where the day has lingered. If you lift a handful in imagination, it slips through your fingers with a dry whisper. Each grain has been moved by water, wind, or both. None of it seems hurried. The dunes are made of repetition, which is another word for time. Geology here is not mountainous or dramatic. It is low, patient, and horizontal. The land does not rise to impress you. It stretches, filters, encloses, and receives. The strange beauty of the Coorong is that its grand structure can look almost minimal. A long line of sand beside a long line of water, with sky over both. Yet within that simplicity, countless small differences decide how life moves. The Murray River adds another layer to this history. Before it meets the sea, it passes through the lower lakes, channels, barrages, and wetlands that shape how fresh water reaches the Coorong. In older times, the river's seasonal pulse could bring more freshness, more movement, and more sediment through the mouth. Today, the system is managed, altered, and carefully watched. But tonight we hold the idea gently, as part of the wetland's layered character. Water regulation has changed the timing and amount of fresh water that reaches this place. Barrages near the lower lakes help manage lake levels and limit seawater intrusion, but they also change the estuary's natural exchanges. Droughts can intensify salinity. Floods can refresh the system. The Coorong lives inside these rhythms of river, sea, climate, and human water management, though the lagoon itself remains quiet under the evening light. You do not need to carry the weight of all that management as a problem tonight. You only need to sense how a wetland can be both natural and changed, ancient and present, resilient and sensitive. The Coorong saline wetlands hold those truths together without speaking. The water reflects the sky. The mud holds prints. The dunes keep their low shape. The system goes on responding, one season at a time. Near the mouth, change can be especially visible. Sandbars form and shift. Channels deepen or shallow. Dredging has sometimes been needed to keep the passage open enough for exchange. To the eye, it may still look like a calm gap between waters, but the movement of sediment is constant. The mouth is less like a door and more like a breathing place, shaped by what presses through and what settles back. You stand there with me for a while, and the strange geometry of the Coorong becomes almost comforting. A river reaches the sea. A sea presses toward a lagoon. A dune keeps them close but separate. A wetland gathers the delayed consequences of all three. There is no single center. The place is made of relationships, and each relationship is softened by distance, sand, salt, and time. This is why the Coorong does not feel like a simple destination. It feels like a threshold that has become a landscape. Everything is in between something else. The water is between river and sea. The land is between dune and mudflat. The plants are between wetness and dryness. The birds are between journeys. And you, listening, can rest between waking and sleep, held by the same gentle uncertainty. And as that threshold deepens around us, we follow the lagoon into night, where its strangeness becomes quieter and easier to feel. The Coorong after dusk has a different texture. The pale glare leaves the water, and the surface turns pewter, then charcoal, then a faintly breathing darkness. The salt smell remains, sharper in the cooling air. Sound carries farther now. A wing beat, a low call, a ripple along the reeds, and the distant surf all seem to arrive separately, with space around them. You can close your eyes and still know where the lagoon is. At night, the wetland's shallow nature feels especially calm. Deep water can seem hidden, but shallow water under darkness feels like a veil laid over the earth. The bottom is close, though invisible. The mud, the plants, the tiny invertebrates, and the resting birds are all near the surface of the world. Nothing here needs depth to feel mysterious. The Coorong finds mystery in thinness. The stars, when the sky is clear, can stretch across the lagoon with surprising brightness. Reflections tremble in the water where it is still enough to hold them. A breeze breaks some stars apart and leaves others whole. The dunes become a darker line against the sky. Somewhere beyond them, the ocean keeps turning, wave after wave, while the lagoon rests in its sheltered length. Night also reveals how much life depends on quiet. Many birds settle, conserve energy, and wait for the next feeding window. Some animals become more active in cooler darkness. Small fish may move along edges if salinity and water levels allow. Insects lift from low vegetation. The air changes from sun-dried openness to a cooler closeness, and the wetland seems to breathe through its margins. You can imagine the mud cooling slowly. Heat leaves it upward into the night. Water in shallow pools loses warmth quickly because there is so little depth to hold it. Temperature, like salinity, can change fast in such a flat system. These small shifts matter to eggs, larvae, plants, fish, and invertebrates. The Coorong's living things are tuned to variation, not to perfect stability. That is another part of why the place feels strange. It is peaceful, but not static. It is calm, but never fixed. The surface gives an impression of stillness, while underneath, chemistry, temperature, oxygen, salinity, and food availability are all adjusting. The wetland is like a sleeping body with many slow processes continuing inside. You do not need to see them for them to be real. As we stand in the dark, the Southern Ocean becomes mostly sound. It does not rush toward us. It remains beyond the dunes, steady and removed, like a memory of larger water. The lagoon beside us makes smaller sounds, closer sounds, sounds you can almost feel against the skin. The contrast is soothing. Vastness on one side, stillness on the other, and you between them, held in cool salt air. The Coorong Saline Wetlands have long been known for birds, but at night their presence softens into pattern rather than spectacle. A pelican shape may rest low and pale in the gloom. A flock may murmur and settle again. Waders tuck themselves along safe shallows. Their bodies become part of the shoreline, not separate from it. You sense them more than identify them, which is sometimes the gentlest way to see. In this dimness, scientific names and categories can loosen. Estuary, lagoon, salt marsh, dune barrier, hypersaline basin, migratory habitat, all of those names remain true. But the place itself is quieter than the language we use for it. You can let the terms drift by like leaves on water. The Coorong does not need us to name every process before it can offer rest. Still, understanding can deepen the rest. Knowing that salinity changes along the lagoon makes the long water feel more alive. Knowing that birds follow food hidden in mud makes each shallow edge more meaningful. Knowing that the dunes were built grain by grain makes their low shapes more beautiful. Science does not have to wake the mind sharply. It can soften it, when carried slowly, with enough wonder. And as the night settles more fully, we move toward the southern reaches, where the lagoon's salt and silence gather in their most unusual forms. Farther along the Coorong, the water can become much more saline, and the landscape begins to feel almost lunar in its quiet. The southern lagoon is not empty, but it is more austere. You may see wider pale margins, shallower basins, and stretches where the water glows faintly under clouded light. The air tastes clean and sharp. The shoreline seems drawn with a finer line, as if salt has edited every edge. Here, evaporation has had more time and distance to work. The farther water sits from frequent exchange with the mouth, the more strongly local conditions can shape it. Sun lifts fresh water away, Wind pushes shallow sheets along the basin. Rainfall may briefly soften the brine, then leave again through evaporation. This is a patient concentrating process, and its result is a wetland that can feel both fragile and severe. Yet severe is not the same as hostile. The Coorong saline wetlands are not angry places. They are selective places. They hold life that has learned the terms of salt, drying, and return. In these southern reaches, the life may be less lush, but each presence matters more to the eye. A bird standing alone seems monumental. A patch of low vegetation seems brave in the stillness. The sensory world here is spare and distinct. Salt crust may crunch softly underfoot if the margin is dry enough. Damp mud may hold a cooler, darker scent beneath the surface. The wind feels wider because there is little to interrupt it. Light travels openly across water and flat ground. When the sun is low, every slight rise and ripple casts a long, delicate shadow. Hypersaline conditions can limit many organisms, but they can favor those adapted to them. Certain algae, microbes, and invertebrates may persist where other forms struggle. Brine-tolerant life often has its own quiet elegance, because it survives not by force, but by chemistry. Cells balance salts, bodies manage water. Reproduction waits for favorable windows. The smallest creatures become experts in patience, and the whole lagoon seems to learn from them. You might wonder why such a place matters if it looks so bare. The answer comes softly. Bare-looking wetlands can be crucial feeding, resting, and breeding habitats when conditions align. They are part of broader networks. They hold water in dry landscapes. They cycle nutrients. They preserve rare communities adapted to salt. They remind us that richness does not always look green, crowded, or easy. The Coorong's strangeness is partly a matter of expectation. We expect wetlands to be soft, reed-filled, and fresh-smelling. Here water can smell like brine and exposed mineral earth. Plants may hug the ground. Birds may be spread across open flats rather than hidden in dense vegetation. The landscape offers fewer layers at first glance, but as you stay, more meanings appear in the space between them. This spaciousness is restful for the listener, too. There is room here for thoughts to widen and become less sharp. The lagoon does not crowd you with detail. It lets details arrive one by one. A line of foam along the shore, a small shell, a salt mark on a stone, a wing crossing low over water, a cool breath of wind moving from dune to flat. And as we continue through that spacious southern quiet, the Coorong begins to show how a wetland can be both delicate and enduring. Delicacy here does not mean weakness. It means that small changes matter. A little more fresh water at the right time can alter salinity enough for plants to grow, invertebrates to flourish, and birds to feed well. A prolonged dry period can push the system towards stronger brine and fewer options. The Coorong responds with fine sensitivity, as though the whole lagoon were listening through its surface. Endurance, meanwhile, belongs to the landform itself. The long basin, the dune barrier, the coastal alignment, and the recurring forces of wind and evaporation give the Coorong a lasting identity. Storms may rearrange edges, seasons may change its water, years may be wetter or drier. Still, the place remains recognizably itself, a narrow wetland between inland water and the Southern Ocean, holding strangeness in a long silver line. You can think of it as a landscape of thresholds that has learned to persist. The Coorong saline wetlands do not resist change by becoming rigid. They persist by moving through states. Wet, dry, brackish, saline, clear, cloudy, full of birds, quiet of birds, exposed, flooded. Each state leaves traces, and each trace influences what comes next. The system is memory, but memory made of water and salt. This is visible in the shoreline. Old watermarks may remain as pale lines. Drifted plant material gathers where waves once touched. Shell fragments settle in curves that match a former level. Mud cracks tell of drying. Fresh tracks tell of recent feeding. The The wetland writes its history on surfaces that will soon change again. Nothing feels permanent, yet nothing feels wasted. The plants also hold this record. Salt marsh may expand or contract with inundation patterns. Rupiah beds may strengthen when salinity, depth, and clarity are favorable, then thin when conditions shift. Reeds may occupy fresher or more sheltered margins. Around each plant community, small animals find structure and food. When you look gently, vegetation becomes a map of water's recent moods. The Coorong's animals read that map without needing words. A bird does not need a chart to know where the mud has softened. Fish do not need a name for a channel to move through it when water allows. Invertebrates respond to wetting, drying, salt, and temperature with ancient accuracy. You and I arrive as observers, but the wetland's own inhabitants are already fluent in its language. This can be a calming thought. The world contains forms of knowledge older than explanation. A seed knows when conditions suit it. A tiny crustacean waits in the sediment until water returns. A bird follows shorelines across distances no map inside its wing can show us directly. The Coorong is strange, but its strangeness is not confusion. It is a highly specific order, expressed softly. As we move along the margin, evening has become deep night. The water is nearly black now, with only a faint reflection where skylight remains. The salt crust is pale under the last glow. Your breathing can slow with the broad, unhurried shape of the lagoon. There is nothing here that asks for quick attention. Even complexity has been lowered into quiet. And from this quiet, we turn toward the seasons, because the Coorong's strangeness changes its face as the year turns over it. In warmer months, the Coorong's saline wetlands can feel exposed and bright, with evaporation working steadily across the shallow basins. The wind may carry a dry edge, water levels can fall, and salt may show itself more clearly along the margins. Birds gather where food remains accessible. The whole place seems pared back to essentials, as if sunlight has removed whatever was not necessary. Summer light can be intense over shallow saline water. It reflects upward from the lagoon and outward from pale ground. The air may shimmer. Reeds and samphire hold their colors in a slightly bleached world. Mudflats warm beneath the sun, and shallow pools can become hot compared with deeper waters elsewhere. You can feel the difference in imagination, the warmth rising, the salt scent sharpening, the horizon trembling with heat. In cooler, wetter times, the wetland may soften. Rain can freshen temporary pools and low flats. Inflows can help dilute salinity, depending on broader river and lake conditions. The colors deepen under cloud. The smell of damp earth becomes stronger. Plants respond where timing allows. The Coorong does not become a different place, exactly, but a different version of itself, more muted, more forgiving, and more open to return. Seasonal wetlands around the main lagoon may fill and empty in ways that matter deeply to life. A depression that seems dry and ordinary for months can become habitat after rain. Seeds can germinate. Invertebrates can hatch or emerge. Birds can find new feeding grounds. Then the water may disappear again, leaving behind memory in eggs, seeds, and resting stages. The cycle is gentle but full of consequence. This is one of the quiet miracles of saline and temporary wetlands. Life does not always need constant comfort. It may need rhythm, wetting, drying, waiting, returning. The Coorong and its surrounding wetlands offer that rhythm in delicate and sometimes unpredictable ways. You can let the thought settle slowly, because sleep itself is a rhythm of withdrawal and return, a nightly movement into stillness and back. Autumn may bring softer light across the lagoon. The air cools but has not yet forgotten warmth. Birds may shift their use of the margins as food and water levels change. Salt marsh colors can seem richer in lower sun. The surface of the lagoon takes on a satin look in calm weather, and each ripple feels more visible because the glare has eased. Winter brings a different hush. Cloud can lower the sky until the whole wetland feels held under a gray blanket. Rain darkens the sand and mud. The smell of salt mingles with wet vegetation. Winds may move across the lagoon with a colder hand, pressing small waves against the shore. Yet even then, the Coorong does not feel harsh in our telling. It feels awake in a quieter, cooler register. Spring returns with signs that may be small at first. Plants brighten, insects become more noticeable, birds move through feeding and breeding cycles according to species, water levels and food. The lagoon may hold a freshness in the air after rain, even where salt remains strong. You sense renewal here, not as sudden abundance, but as a gradual loosening of the wetland's breath. The Coorong Saline Wetlands are strange, because each season reveals a different balance between water and salt. There is no single perfect image of the place. The wetland is not only the mirror-calm lagoon at dusk, nor only the white-edged basin in heat, nor only the bird-filled mudflat. It is all of these, changing slowly through the year, while the long dune and low sky hold the frame. You can rest inside that idea. You do not need to choose one version of yourself tonight either. Like the lagoon, you can be many conditions held in one body, some clear, some cloudy, some full, some drawn down. The Coorong makes room for changing states without needing them to become dramatic. It simply continues, salt and water, wind and bird, margin and moonlight. And as the seasons pass over us in this quiet way, we return to the water's edge and look more closely at the birds, because they are the wetland's visible breath. A pelican on the Coorong can seem almost ceremonial, though it is only resting or feeding as its kind has done for ages. Its large pale body floats with surprising softness. The bill rests downward, the eye appears calm, and the whole bird seems made for unhurried water. When several gather together, they become a floating island of white and shadow, drifting without hurry across the lagoon's subdued shine. Pelicans depend on fish and suitable feeding areas, and the Coorong has long been important to them. Their presence reminds you that saline wetlands can still be generous when channels, fish movement, and water conditions align. They do not need the whole lagoon to be perfect. They need enough places, at the right times, where life gathers close to the surface. Their broad wings and heavy bodies turn that hidden gathering into visible grace. Smaller birds create a different kind of attention. Waders step through shallows with a tenderness that seems almost meditative. Their feet barely break the surface. Their bills search mud and water with precise, repeated motions. Some feed in loose groups, each bird keeping its own rhythm. If one lifts, others may lift with it, and the flock turns like a cloth of light before settling again. For migratory shorebirds, the Coorong saline wetlands form part of a much larger chain. They need places to rest and feed after long flights, places where mudflats and shallows provide enough energy for the next stage of life. We do not need to make their journeys dramatic. It is enough to imagine one small body arriving tired, finding the right depth of water, and lowering its bill into soft mud. There are also resident birds, waterfowl, terns, gulls, swans, and others that use the wetland according to season and condition. Each species reads the lagoon differently. One seeks fish, one seeks seeds, one seeks invertebrates in the mud, one rests on an island or exposed bar. The Coorong becomes many habitats at once, depending on the body that enters it. Bird calls carry across the open water in a softened way. A pelican colony may be largely quiet, while smaller birds make fine notes that seem to stitch the dusk together. Ducks murmur, gulls call and settle, wings pass overhead with a low rush of air. The soundscape never needs to become busy. Even with many birds present, the wide lagoon keeps a sense of spacious calm. Watching birds here can help the mind slow, because their movements are repetitive without being mechanical. Dip, step, pause, lift, float, turn, settle, preen, rise, circle, return. Each action belongs to survival, but from a distance it feels like a form of gentle order. You follow one bird for a while, then lose it among reflections, and the loss is not troubling. The wetland keeps it. The Coorong's strangeness lies in how much depends on conditions that are almost invisible to us. A bird chooses a feeding place because of depth, salinity, sediment texture, prey density, wind exposure, and safety, though it does not list them in language. You and I see only a graceful body in shallow water. Beneath that grace is an entire arrangement of circumstance. This makes the lagoon feel wise without making it sentimental. It is not wise in a human way. It does not intend comfort, but it holds a form of patterned responsiveness that can feel calming to witness. Life arrives where it can. It waits where it must. It moves when conditions ask it to move. Nothing wastes energy on hurry. And as the birds settle farther into the dimness, we let our attention sink below them again, toward the water plants and submerged meadows that appear when the Coorong is ready for them. Rupia is not a dramatic plant, and that is part of its beauty. In suitable water, it grows as delicate submerged stems and leaves, offering structure where the lagoon might otherwise be open and bare. Its flowers and seeds are modest. Its presence can be easy to overlook unless you know how important it is. Beneath the water, it can make a soft green world for small creatures. In the Coorong Saline Wetlands, Rupia has often been discussed because it responds closely to salinity, water depth and clarity. When the balance is right, it can support invertebrates and provide food resources for birds. When salinity becomes too high, or water levels shift at difficult times, the plant may struggle to complete its life cycle. This is not a failure of the plant. It is the wetland's fine balance made visible through growth. You can imagine looking through clear, shallow water and seeing stems swaying just above the sediment. Light moves over them in wavering bands. Tiny animals cling, crawl, or drift nearby. The water is cool against the imagined skin of your hand, with a faint slipperiness from life growing on surfaces. Above, the lagoon looks simple. Below, it holds a small architecture of shelter. Aquatic plants in shallow saline systems do more than look alive. They slow water, trap particles, offer habitat, influence oxygen, and help shape food webs. They make the bottom less bare. They give small animals places to hide and feed. They may also stabilize sediments, reducing cloudiness when conditions allow. A plant like Rupia can become a quiet support beam in a very open room. But support beams made of living tissue need favorable seasons. Seeds must form and remain viable. Water must be deep enough at the right time, but not too deep for light. Salinity must be tolerable. Turbidity must not block too much sunlight. The Coorong asks this plant to live at the meeting point of many variables, and the plant answers when it can. There is tenderness in that uncertainty. Not every year offers the same chance. Not every basin responds the same way. Yet when submerged plants return, they show that the lagoon can still soften into habitat. They remind us that recovery in wetlands often begins quietly, with roots, stems, seeds, and small animals appearing before the larger signs become obvious. Renewal has a whispering phase. As listeners, we can take comfort in that. The most important changes are not always immediately visible. A bed of plants below cloudy water may be establishing itself long before the surface looks different. A seed bank may be waiting in sediment. A tiny animal population may be rebuilding in silence. The Coorong is full of these hidden beginnings, and they suit the slow hour. The water above the plants darkens as night goes on. Reflections weaken. Shapes blur. The lagoon becomes less visual and more atmospheric. A cool presence beside the dunes. You hear reeds moving, though you may not see them clearly. You smell salt, mud and damp plant matter. You sense the bottom close beneath the water, holding all the small green work we have just imagined. And as our attention drifts from the submerged plants to the margins again, the Coorong opens into the salt marsh, where land and water speak in low colors. Salt marsh at the Coorong Saline Wetlands is a place of low forms and careful adaptations. It does not rise high around you. It spreads near the ground, with fleshy stems, salt-tolerant leaves, and patches of bare mud between plants. In daylight, samphire can glow red, green, orange, or bronze depending on season and stress. In twilight, those colors darken into a muted quilt beside the lagoon. The ground here may feel springy, sticky, crusted, or cracked depending on recent water. Salt can gather at the surface. Mud can hold your footprint if it is soft enough. Small channels carry water in and out, leaving damp lines that shine in low light. The smell is intimate and close, a mixture of saline earth, plant oils, and decay returning itself to the system. It is a humble richness. Salt marsh plants live with immersion and exposure. At times, water covers their roots or surrounds their stems. Later, the surface dries, and salt concentration rises. These plants must manage water carefully inside their tissues, because salt can make ordinary water uptake more difficult. Some have succulent parts that store moisture. Others deal with salts in specialized ways. Their stillness is full of quiet physiological labor. You may not think of a low plant as brave, and we do not need to make it heroic. But there is something deeply peaceful in seeing life fitted so closely to place. The samphire does not wish the wetland were fresher. It belongs to this margin, with its wetting, drying, salt, and wind. It holds the soil with small roots and receives the evening without complaint. Salt marsh also softens the boundary between land and lagoon. It slows flows, traps sediment, and creates habitat for insects, crustaceans, and other small lives. Birds may feed nearby or rest along its edges. During higher water, fish may move into flooded margins if connections allow. At lower water, the same ground may become exposed, fragrant, and patterned with tracks. The marsh is both land and water, depending on the hour. This in-between quality echoes the larger strangeness of the Coorong. Nothing is only one thing. The mouth is not only river or sea. The lagoon is not only fresh or salt. The marsh is not only dry or wet. The dunes are not only fresh or salt. The marsh is not only dry or wet. The dunes are not only barrier or bridge. When you let that complexity become gentle, it feels less like confusion and more like permission to be between. The colors of salt marsh can be especially calming at sunset. Reds soften into browns. Greens become gray. Pale salt holds the last light. The lagoon reflects a diluted sky. A bird may stand motionless among the plants, nearly invisible until it moves. The scene does not press itself upon you. It waits for your attention, and if your attention drifts, it remains whole without you. That is a rare kind of comfort. Many landscapes seem to ask the eye to climb, enter, compare, or seek a viewpoint. The Coorong asks the eye to lower, soften, and stay near the surface. Its wonders are not hidden because they are secretive. They are hidden because they are quiet. You find them by slowing to the scale at which the wetland is already living, and from the salt marsh, we let the mind return to the long water itself, where the lagoon holds the sky through another slow change of light. The long water of the Coorong Saline Wetlands has a way of holding the sky as if it were another shallow layer. At dawn, the lagoon can become pale blue before the land has fully woken. At noon it may flash white and silver in the sun. At evening, it receives pink, gray, and violet tones without keeping any of them for long. You watch the colors pass, and the water seems less like a surface than a memory. Because the lagoon is shallow, light reaches it differently from deeper water. It can bounce from the bottom, scatter through suspended particles, and return from salt-bright margins. A small change in cloud can alter the whole mood. A breeze can roughen reflection into thousands of tiny facets. Calm can make the surface so smooth that birds seem to stand inside the sky. The Coorong's strangeness often arrives through this shifting light. You may notice that the horizon feels unusually wide here. The dunes are low, the water lies flat. Vegetation keeps close to the ground. There is little to interrupt the eye, so distance becomes part of the atmosphere. It is not empty distance. It is distance filled with faint motion, mineral smell, bird calls, and the soft brightness of saline water. The whole place feels stretched, gently outward. In places, the lagoon may be so shallow that a bird can walk far from shore. Its legs vanish into a few inches of water, while the reflected body trembles below it. A ripple moves from each step. The bird's shadow touches the bottom. You begin to sense how thin the wetland can be, how near the sky and sediment are to one another, how much life can unfold in almost no depth. That thinness is one of the Coorong's most unusual gifts. A deep lake hides its floor, but this lagoon often lets the bottom participate in the scene. Sand, mud, plants, shells, algae and salt are close to sight and weather. Sun warms them quickly, wind stirs them easily. Birds reach them without diving. The ecosystem is open to air, light, and change in a very immediate way. When we think of water, we often imagine depth as mystery, but the Coorong shows that shallowness has its own mysteries. A few centimeters of water can transform mud into habitat. A small rise in level can reconnect feeding places. A slight drop can expose a wide flat and change where birds gather. In this landscape, small vertical changes become broad horizontal events, moving across the lagoon like slow thoughts. You can feel that thought in your own body as we drift beside it. Nothing falls quickly here. Everything spreads. Light spreads. Salt spreads. Wind spreads. A bird call spreads across open water and fades without echo. Even your breathing can seem to spread wider in the chest, easing into the same long shape as the wetland. The Coorong teaches calm by extension. The sediment below the water is a quiet archive. Fine particles settle when water slows. Organic matter gathers where plants grow and die. Shell fragments and minerals lie in layers too subtle for the eye to separate. In some places, the mud may be dark with decomposition. In others, sand may dominate, pale and shifting. Each bottom type offers different living conditions for invertebrates, plants, and feeding birds. You may picture lowering your gaze to a patch of exposed mud. It shines with a thin film of moisture. Tiny holes stipple the surface. A track curves through it, delicate and recent. Salt crystals form along a higher edge where drying has begun. The air smells slightly metallic, slightly earthy, and strongly saline. This small patch contains a whole weather history, written in watermarks and texture. The Coorong saline wetlands are strange because their beauty often requires nearness. From far away, one may see a long, quiet lagoon and low coastal land. From close up, the place becomes many places: a wet patch, a dry crack, a salt rim, a plant stem, a bird print, a floating feather, a line of foam. The landscape asks you to come down to its level, and then it opens. This closeness does not make the place smaller. It makes the vastness more intimate. You realize that a long lagoon is built from small edges repeated endlessly. Every meter has its own balance of salt, water, grain size, plant cover, and light. Every small basin has its own timing. The Coorong is not strange because it refuses understanding. It is strange because understanding must move patiently, edge by edge. And as we follow those edges, the wetland begins to reveal the hidden role of wind, the invisible hand that moves shallow water without ever seeming to arrive. Wind is always part of the Coorong. Even when it is gentle, it moves across the open lagoon with little obstruction, making ripples, pushing surface water, and shifting the feel of the shore. A breeze from one direction may pile water subtly against one margin. Another may expose mud somewhere else. In a shallow system, wind can act like a soft tide, especially where the sea tide itself is filtered by distance and sand. You can hear the wind before you define it. It brushes the low plants. It combs the grasses on the dunes. It turns the water from mirror to satin, then from satin to a fine, trembling skin. It carries the smell of salt and old vegetation. On cooler evenings, it touches your face with a clean edge, not harsh, just enough to remind you that the lagoon is open to air. Wind also stirs sediment when the water is shallow. Fine particles can lift from the bottom and cloud the water, changing how far light can penetrate. This matters for submerged plants because they need sunlight. It matters for feeders because turbidity can alter visibility and oxygen conditions. A simple breeze across the lagoon can therefore become part of plant growth, animal movement, and the clarity of the whole wetland. The Coorong's long shape gives wind room to work. Across a broad lake, waves may build differently, but here, along a narrow corridor, wind direction can align with water and produce a sense of slow pressure down the basin. The result may be subtle to a casual visitor, yet for the wetland, subtle pressure is enough. Water moves, edges change, feeding grounds shift, and salt may concentrate or disperse in small ways. This is a quiet lesson in scale. What feels like weather to you may feel like architecture to the lagoon. Wind does not only pass over the Coorong, it helps make momentary rooms for life. A sheltered edge may become calm enough for feeding. An exposed stretch may become too stirred for light-loving plants. A wind-pushed pool may deepen slightly and then ease back. The place is always being arranged. At night, the wind often seems to grow more personal. Without the sharpness of bright light, you feel it in sound and skin. The reeds whisper. The dunes breathe dry grains across themselves. Shallow water taps at the margin with a repeated, softened note. You may feel your own thoughts becoming like those ripples, moving and fading, never needing to become anything more urgent than motion. This is why the Coorong is such a sleep-friendly landscape in the mind. Its processes repeat without becoming mechanical. Wind moves water, sun draws water upward. Salt remains, birds feed and rest, plants wait for their conditions. Mud receives prints and loses them. There is rhythm everywhere, but no ticking clock. The wetland keeps time in gradients, not alarms. The strangeness of this place is never loud. It is not a spectacle that demands alertness. Instead, it is a series of gentle mismatches. A wetland that can be saltier than the sea. A coastal lagoon that follows the ocean for many miles without becoming ocean. A river mouth that belongs to sand as much as water. A shallow place with deep ecological memory. Each mismatch settles slowly into wonder, and as the wind carries us farther along the water, we come to the meeting of river influence and marine influence, where the Coorong's identity remains beautifully unsettled. Near the northern reaches, the Coorong Saline Wetlands remember the Murray more clearly. The river's great basin lies behind this place, carrying stories of rainfall, dry plains, tributaries, irrigation, floodplains, and long inland distances. By the time water reaches the lower lakes and mouth, it has already traveled through many climates and soils. It arrives changed by the continent. Then it meets the sea's older rhythm. This meeting is not a simple line on a map. Freshwater, brackish water, and seawater mingle according to flow, tide, wind, openings, and management. Sometimes the system receives more river freshness, sometimes marine influence is stronger, sometimes drought tightens the whole wetland into salinity and exposure. The Coorong is strange because it is a conversation among waters, and no single voice speaks all the time. You can imagine tasting the air at this meeting place. It is salty, but not purely oceanic. There is mud in it, reed in it, river earth in it, and the mineral dryness of evaporation. The surface carries faint movements from several causes at once. A small wave may be wind-made, tide-influenced, or shaped by a distant change in flow. To the eye, all of it is simply water. The Murray mouth itself has long been a dynamic passage. Sand is moved by coastal processes, and the mouth can become narrower or wider depending on conditions. When river flows are low and sand accumulates, exchange may be limited. When flows are stronger, the passage can be refreshed and reshaped. This balance affects the Coorong because the lagoon depends on movement, not just presence, of water. Movement keeps estuaries alive in a particular way. It brings oxygen, alters salinity, carries nutrients, shifts sediment, and creates gradients that different organisms can use. Too little movement can make a shallow system more stagnant or saline. Too much disturbance at the wrong time can also alter habitats. The Coorong lives between these needs, as so many wetlands do, holding the difficult grace of moderation. For a listener drifting towards sleep, moderation can be a restful idea, not stillness as emptiness, and not motion as excitement, but a balanced movement slow enough to hold the mind. The Coorong's water moves in this way when conditions are kind. It turns, exchanges, dilutes, concentrates, reveals, and covers. It never needs to rush to matter. It matters by continuing. The birds near the mouth often reveal the richness of this mixed zone. Where channels, shallows, and fish come together, larger birds may feed. Where mudflats emerge, shorebirds probe. Where water plants and invertebrates thrive, other species arrive. Habitat here is not one thing, but a set of possibilities arranged by depth and salinity. you begin to understand that the wetland's complexity is a kind of generosity. That generosity is fragile, though we speak of it softly. If salinity rises too much in certain areas, some food resources decline. If water levels fail to match life cycles, plants and animals may miss their moment. If the mouth becomes restricted, exchange suffers. None of this needs dramatic language. It is enough to know that the Coorong is finely tuned, and finely tuned places deserve quiet attention. You can stand with me at the edge of that attention. The water darkens toward evening again. The sandbar shapes are low and shifting. A pelican glides by with only a small wake behind it. The sky holds a thin wash of color, and the first stars seem to come slowly, as if they too are waiting for the lagoon to settle. And as this mixed water settles into night, we follow the Coorong's strangeness into the idea of salt itself, that simple mineral presence that changes everything it touches. Salt is quiet, but it has power. In the Coorong Saline Wetlands, it changes which plants can grow, which animals can persist, how water feels, how mud dries, and how light reflects. It can make the air taste sharp and clean. It can make exposed ground pale. It can preserve traces for a while, then erase them when water returns. Salt is not a decoration here. It is one of the wetland's main languages. When water evaporates, dissolved salts remain. This fact is simple enough to hold in the mind without strain. Sun and wind lift the water molecules into the air, leaving minerals behind in the lagoon. Over time, if not enough fresher water arrives to dilute or flush them, salinity increases. In shallow basins, the change can be especially noticeable because there is little volume to buffer the system. The result is a landscape that feels intensely physical. You can sense salt in the nose, on the lips, on the skin after wind has blown across the lagoon. You can see it in crusts and pale rims. You can imagine it tightening the surface of drying mud. Even the plants seem shaped by it, low and fleshy, conserving water, holding their own internal balance against the mineral pressure outside. For aquatic life, salinity affects the movement of water across membranes. Organisms must regulate internal chemistry, or they lose water to their surroundings. This is why hypersaline places are selective. Not every fish, plant, insect, or mollusk can live there. Those that can often have specialized adaptations, whether behavioral, physiological, or life cycle based. The Coorong's saltiness becomes a filter, allowing certain communities to form and others to fade. This filtering helps create the wetland's unusual character. In fresher wetlands, many species may compete, overlap, and crowd the scene. In saline wetlands, life often appears more spaced, more particular, and more dependent on timing. A bloom of algae, a hatch of invertebrates, a growth phase of submerged plants, a gathering of birds, each may occur when conditions open briefly. You learn to see abundance as episodic. There is a strange tenderness in that word, episodic. It means life arrives in passages. It does not need to be constant to be real. The Coorong may look quiet for long periods, then hold a sudden concentration of feeding birds, or a soft return of plant growth, or a flush of small animals in temporary water. The wetland is not empty between these events. It is preparing. Salt also alters the way water behaves visually. More saline water can feel heavier, clearer in some contexts, or differently reflective depending on particles and biological activity. Along the margins, salt crystals catch light with a granular shine. Under moonlight, pale crusts may seem to glow more than the water itself. The effect is subtle, but it gives the landscape an otherworldly calm, like a shoreline remembered in a dream. You and I do not need to cross that crust or test it. We only watch it. The salt lies where the water has been, marking absence with brightness. It tells us that disappearance can leave form behind. It tells us that what evaporates is not entirely gone. Some part remains, changed into pattern, edge, and mineral trace. In the Coorong, even loss becomes visible. And as the salt marks the edges around us, we drift toward the temporary wetlands and side basins, the smaller rooms where water appears, lingers, and withdraws. Away from the main lagoon, the Coorong region holds wetlands that may fill after rain, or with changing water conditions, then dry again into quiet basins. These places can look modest from a distance, a shallow depression, a gray-green fringe of plants, a patch of darker soil. Yet when water returns, they may awaken quickly, because many wetland lives are built around waiting. Waiting is not empty in these basins. Seeds wait in the sediment. Eggs of tiny invertebrates may rest through dry periods. Microbial communities remain ready to respond when moisture comes back. Salt levels shift as water arrives and then evaporates. A basin that seemed still can become active within days or weeks, not because life appeared from nowhere, but because life was already present in a paused form. You can imagine the first rain after a dry spell. Drops darken dust. Salt crust softens. The smell of wet earth rises with a deep mineral freshness. Small pools gather in hollows. The surface trembles under falling water, then smooths when the shower passes. The next morning the basin holds sky, clouds, and the first signs of return. It feels as if the land has taken a slow breath. Temporary wetlands are often misunderstood because they do not always look alive. We tend to trust water we can see, and we forget the hidden continuity beneath dry ground. But in landscapes like the Coorong, drying is not necessarily an end. It can be part of the cycle. Many organisms avoid unfavorable conditions by waiting through them, then emerging when water, temperature, and salinity allow. This rhythm suits the broader Coorong system: permanent water, semi-permanent water, temporary pools, salt marsh, mudflats, dunes, and marine influence all sit near one another. Each has its own timing. Some respond to tides or wind, some respond to rainfall, some respond to rimfall, some respond to rimfall. Together, they create a mosaic of wetness and dryness, which changes through seasons and years. For birds, these side wetlands can add important options. A temporary pool may offer feeding after rain. A damp flat may expose invertebrates. A low island may provide resting space if conditions are suitable. The birds move through the landscape according to opportunity, and their presence shows us that habitat is not just a place, but a timing of place. The Coorong is habitat because it changes. There is comfort in knowing that dry-looking ground may still be part of a living wetland. It means absence is not always abandonment. Quiet is not always decline. Sometimes quiet is dormancy, and dormancy is a kind of held promise. The Coorong saline wetlands make room for that slower understanding, where life can step back from visibility and remain present in potential. As we linger near one of these basins, night air cools the damp soil. Frogs may not dominate this saline world the way they might in fresher wetlands, but small sounds still emerge. Insects move in low vegetation. Water settles. A bird calls once from the dark, then falls silent. The pool reflects a few stars, and each star trembles when the wind touches the surface. This small basin does not need to be large to belong to the Coorong's strangeness. It is another expression of the same pattern. Water arrives, salt remains, life waits, conditions shift, and the landscape becomes itself again in a new form. The main lagoon may be long and famous, but the side basins hold intimate versions of its logic. They are little mirrors of the whole, and as we leave the temporary water behind, we return once more to the long dune barrier, because the Coorong is shaped as much by sand as by salt. The Young Husband Peninsula runs like a quiet spine between the Coorong and the Southern Ocean. It is narrow, sandy, and continually shaped by wind, waves, and plants. From the lagoon side, it may look calm and low. From the ocean side, it meets surf, spray, and shifting beach. Between those two faces, the peninsula holds the wetland in a sheltered line. Sand barriers are living landforms in their own way. They move slowly, build and erode, strengthen with vegetation, and alter under storms. Grasses and shrubs help bind the dunes, but they do not make them permanent in a rigid sense. The coast continues to work on them. Wind continues to lift loose grains. The peninsula is a boundary that must keep being made. You can feel the difference between the two sides. On the ocean side, air is wetter with spray, and the sound of waves is fuller. On the lagoon side, the sound is muted, the water flatter, the salt smell more still. The sand underfoot connects both worlds. It has touched wave, wind, rain, root, shell, and footstep. It is the quiet material through which the Coorong's shape becomes possible. Without the barrier, the lagoon would not exist in this long, sheltered form. The Southern Ocean would meet the low coast differently, perhaps with open beaches, inlets, or shifting estuarine shapes. With the barrier, water is held back from direct ocean force and allowed to become shallow, saline, and extended. The Coorong's odd length is therefore a story of sand doing the work of architecture. That architecture is soft, which makes it more beautiful. It does not resemble stone walls or cliffs. It does not resist the ocean by hardness. It persists by accumulation and adjustment. Grain by grain, ridge by ridge, plant by plant, the dunes create shelter. The Coorong saline wetlands exist partly because small things gathered and stayed long enough to guide water into stillness. This thought can be very calming. A great landscape may arise from small repeated acts. A dune is not one grand event. It is countless grains placed by forces that do not hurry. A wetland is not one pool. It is water, sediment, vegetation, animals, chemistry, weather, and time meeting again and again. The Coorong's strangeness is built from repetition, and repetition can be soothing. At night, the dunes become almost invisible, but their presence remains in sound. They soften the roar of the ocean into a lower murmur. They block direct waves from the lagoon. They shape the wind that reaches the water. They hold the line between restless surf and quiet brine. Even unseen, they are working. The boundary remains active in darkness. You may imagine walking along the lagoon side of the peninsula in moonlight. The sand is cool. Low plants make dark shapes. The water lies to one side, long and faintly reflective. The ocean lies beyond, louder but hidden. Above, stars appear clearer when the air is dry. Each step is muffled, and the whole night seems wrapped in pale mineral silence. The Coorong feels strange in this position because it is so close to the sea, yet so different from it. Only a narrow body of sand separates surf from lagoon, but the two waters have different moods, different movements, and different kinds of life. Proximity does not mean sameness. The world can place two environments side by side and let each keep its own temperament. And as we rest with that thought, the unseen groundwater beneath the dunes and margins begins to matter, moving quietly where the eye cannot follow. Groundwater is one of the quieter influences in the Coorong saline wetlands. It moves below the surface, through sand, sediment, and soil, carrying dissolved minerals and connecting places in hidden ways. You do not see it arrive like rain or flow like a channel, yet it can seep, rise, mix, and influence salinity or moisture along certain margins. The wetland has visible water, and it has water in hiding. In coastal systems, groundwater may be fresh, brackish, saline, or layered, depending on geology, recharge, evaporation, and connection to the sea. Beneath dunes, rain can percolate down and form lenses of fresher water in some settings. Near saline lagoons, salt water may also influence subsurface conditions. The result is another set of gradients, not obvious at first glance, but important to plants and soil chemistry. You can sense hidden water indirectly. A patch of vegetation may be greener where subsurface moisture persists. A low area may stay damp longer than surrounding ground. Salt may concentrate where evaporation draws mineral-rich water upward. The surface becomes a message from below. The Coorong is full of these quiet messages, and part of its strangeness is that so much of it must be inferred gently. This hidden movement gives the landscape another kind of depth. Not vertical depth like a deep lake or ocean trench, but depth of connection. Water above, water below, water held in plant tissues, water vapor in air, water arriving as rain, water leaving through evaporation. The wetland is not a flat picture. It is a slow exchange among forms of moisture, each one changing the others. For sleep, this is a comforting image. Nothing needs to be forced. Water finds its paths through small spaces, grain by grain, pore by pore. It moves where pressure, gravity and chemistry allow. It may take a long time to emerge, or it may remain below, nourishing roots invisibly. The Coorong reminds us that support is often quiet and unseen. Groundwater can also carry salts, and those salts may appear at the surface as crusts or influence which plants can grow. In a saline wetland, this upward movement can be significant, especially where evaporation is strong. Water rises, evaporates, and leaves minerals behind. The process is slow, but its marks can be clear. Pale soil, sparse vegetation, and plants adapted to salt. You may feel the air cooling further now, as if the hidden water below the land has lent the night a deeper stillness. The mud releases its stored warmth. The sand loses heat more quickly. Low plants gather dew if conditions allow. A fine dampness may touch surfaces that seemed dry an hour before. The wetland continues changing while appearing almost motionless. The Coorong saline wetlands are strange because their visible calm is supported by invisible movement. Groundwater, evaporation, seepage, and salt transport happen below the level of easy attention. Birds feed above it. Plants root into it. Sediment records it. The lagoon reflects sky over it. As we breathe with the night air, the hidden processes feel less abstract and more like a lullaby under the landscape. And as that hidden water moves beneath us, we drift toward the microbes and algae, the smallest makers of color, oxygen, food, and quiet transformation. Microbial life in the Coorong is not visible in the way pelicans are visible, but it helps shape the wetland from within. Bacteria, algae, and other microscopic organisms respond to salinity, nutrients, light, temperature, and water depth. They grow on mud, drift in water, break down organic matter, and form films that feed small animals. The lagoon's quiet surface rests above immense smallness. When you see a sheen on wet mud, it may be a biofilm, a living layer of microorganisms and fine particles. To a bird, that surface may be food directly or indirectly. To the sediment, it may help bind particles. To the wetland, it is part of nutrient cycling and energy flow. To the resting human eye, it is only a subtle gloss, easily mistaken for reflected light. Algae can color shallow water when conditions favor growth. Sometimes the color is greenish, sometimes brownish, sometimes faintly reddish depending on the organisms and chemistry. In saline systems, specialized communities may develop where fewer competitors can persist. These small lives convert sunlight into biological energy, forming the base of food webs that eventually support insects, crustaceans, fish, and birds. The process is simple in outline and endlessly complex in detail. Light enters water, cells use it, nutrients are taken up, oxygen may be produced, organic matter is created, consumed, recycled, and settled. In the Coorong saline wetlands, this happens under changing salinity and water levels, so the microbial world must also be responsive. The smallest lives are not passive dust. They are active participants in the wetland's breathing. You can imagine a shallow pool in morning light. The surface is almost still. Beneath it, microscopic cells are suspended in brightness. On the bottom, a thin mat holds tiny bubbles. The bubbles gather, tremble, and release. No sound reaches you, but the image is peaceful, like a secret form of respiration. The wetland is making and remaking itself at a scale below speech. Microbes also help decompose plant material and animal remains. They return nutrients to circulation. In low oxygen mud, different processes unfold, sometimes producing distinctive smells, earthy, sulfurous, or mineral-rich. Those smells are part of the wetland's reality. They are not unpleasant when held gently. They remind you that life and decay are not opposites here, but phases of the same slow turning. This can soften the mind. A fallen reed becomes food for microbes. Microbial work feeds the system. Tiny animals graze. Birds feed. Nutrients return. The Coorong does not waste its quiet materials. Everything moves through forms, some visible, some invisible, all belonging. Even salt, which seems still and mineral, participates by shaping who can join this cycle and when. The strangeness of the Coorong is therefore not only scenic, it is metabolic. It lies in how energy moves through a shallow, salty, changing place. It lies in how sunlight becomes algae, how algae becomes invertebrate, how invertebrate becomes bird movement, how bird movement writes tracks across mud, how mud receives the track and then smooths again underwater. The whole system is a sentence written slowly, and as that sentence continues, we follow it toward the fish and channels, where moving water gives larger bodies a path through the lagoon. Fish in the Coorong saline wetlands depend greatly on connection. Channels, water levels, salinity, and access to the Murray mouth all influence which fish can move, feed, breed, or pass through. Some species tolerate brackish conditions well. Others use the estuarine zone at particular life stages. When conditions allow, fish become part of the link between water movement and bird life. You may not see fish easily in the dim lagoon. The water may be cloudy, reflective, or dark, but their presence can be revealed by a ring on the surface, a pelican's attention, or the quick disturbance of shallows near reeds. A small flicker becomes a sign. A feeding bird becomes another sign. The Coorong often asks us to notice life by its effects. Estuarine fish are used to change. They may live where salinity rises and falls, where temperature shifts, and where turbidity varies with wind and flow. Their bodies regulate salts and water. Their behavior follows channels, edges, and food. In a place like the Coorong, fish populations can respond strongly to freshwater inflows and mouth conditions because access and chemistry matter so much. When river flows are sufficient and exchange improves, some fish may benefit from fresher conditions, better connectivity, or improved habitat. During dry or highly saline periods, suitable areas can shrink. This affects not only fish, but also birds that feed on them. A pelican floating calmly on the lagoon is connected to hydrology, salinity, channel form, and the long history of water moving through the lower Murray. You can imagine a fish moving through a shallow channel at night. The water is cool, the bottom is close. Reeds or submerged plants provide edges. The fish moves without sound, guided by senses more suited to darkness than ours. Above, the stars tremble on the surface. Around it, the lagoon's salt, temperature, oxygen, and shelter form the boundaries of its small, fluid world. There is nothing dramatic in this movement. It is simply life passing through the conditions available. The fish does not need to know that the place is called strange. It knows gradients, cover, food, and flow. It knows when water is tolerable and when it must move. The wetland is full of these practical knowledges, held in bodies rather than words. The channels themselves can be subtle. In shallow wetlands, a channel may be only slightly deeper than surrounding flats. But that slight depth can matter greatly. It can hold water longer, provide movement routes, and connect basins that would otherwise be isolated. To human eyes, the difference may appear small. To fish, invertebrates, and water plants, it can be the difference between presence and absence. This is another form of the Coorong's fine-scale strangeness. A few centimeters, a small opening, a narrow passage, a change in salinity, a day of wind, a week of freshwater flow. These modest things can alter the living pattern. The wetland magnifies subtlety. It reminds you that calm places may be exquisitely sensitive, and sensitivity can be beautiful when we meet it with care. And as the fish move through the hidden channels, our attention rises again to the open air, where the wetland becomes a resting place for wings. The air over the Coorong saline wetlands is part of the habitat. Birds cross it, insects drift through it, salt moves in it, and sound carries across it. At dawn, the air may feel cool and rinsed. By afternoon, it may shimmer over shallow water. At dusk, it gathers softness again. You notice the changes on your face before your mind names them. A bird in flight uses the openness differently from a bird on the mud. Pelicans rise with large, slow wing beats, then glide when air allows. Smaller shorebirds move in coordinated turns, catching light as their bodies tilt together. Terns may hover and dip. Ducks pass low, their wings making a faint rushing sound. The Coorong's low horizon gives every flight a feeling of space and ease. For migratory birds, rest is not passive. Feeding grounds must provide enough energy to support long journeys. Safe resting places must reduce disturbance. Suitable water depths must align with the length of legs and bills. The wetland's value depends on details that seem small from a distance, such as exposed mud at the right time or invertebrates concentrated in accessible shallows. This makes watching birds here a kind of listening. You listen with your eyes for what the birds indicate. If they gather densely, something is available. If they move on, conditions may be changing. If certain species appear, the water, mud, and food have met their needs. The flock becomes a gentle instrument, registering the wetland's invisible states. In the evening, flocks can lift suddenly but softly, not as alarm in our telling, only as movement. They rise, turn, and settle elsewhere. Their wings catch the last light. Their reflections scatter across the lagoon and disappear. The sound of many wings can be surprisingly tender, like cloth being shaken far away. Then stillness returns, wider than before. You can let that widening stillness enter you. Each time the birds settle, your thoughts may settle too. Each time the water smooths, your breathing may soften. The Coorong does not demand focus. It offers recurring points of attention, each one simple enough to hold for a moment, then release. A bird, a ripple, a salt edge, a reed shadow, a quiet return. The Coorong Saline Wetlands are strange because they are both a local place and a node in global movement. A bird that feeds here may depend on wetlands far away as well. A change in one resting place can matter across an entire flyway, yet the experience of watching that bird remains intimate. One small body steps through one shallow pool, under one cooling sky. There is peace in holding both scales at once. The vast and the small do not cancel each other. The Coorong can be part of continental water management, coastal geomorphology, migratory networks, and microbial cycling, while also being one feather caught on wet sand. The mind can rest in that layering. It does not need to choose between detail and immensity. And as the air darkens again with slow-moving wings, we turn toward the ancient feeling of the place, the way the Coorong seems to carry time without raising its voice. Time in the Coorong Saline Wetlands is not vertical like a cliff face, where layers stack visibly above one another. It is horizontal, spread across water, mud, dune, marsh, and shoreline. The past lies in old sand ridges, buried sediments, changing mouths, former water levels, and the continuing habits of plants and birds. You do not climb through time here, you walk beside it. The wetland's long form encourages this feeling. As you look down the lagoon, distance becomes time-like. The far water fades into haze, and you can imagine seasons laid along its length. Freshness near one end, stronger salt farther away, flood memory here, dryness there, bird gatherings shifting from basin to basin. The Coorong seems to hold past and present in one long, low gesture. Geologically, coastlines are always temporary, though temporary may mean thousands of years. Sea levels, sediment supply, storms, currents, and vegetation all shape what appears stable to a human life. The Coorong's barrier and lagoon belong to that moving coast. They feel ancient because they are older than memory, yet they remain young compared with the deeper earth. This middle age of landscapes can be especially soothing. It tells us that change need not be sudden to be real. A dune may migrate slowly. A channel may shift over seasons. A wetland may become saltier through dry years, then soften after large flows. Birds may alter their patterns. Plants may retreat or return. The Coorong is not frozen as a postcard. It is a process with a recognizable face. You can feel this process under the stillness. The lagoon tonight is only one moment in a long sequence. Tomorrow, the wind may come from another direction. Next month, the water may sit at a different level. Another season may bring rain, heat, freshening, or concentration. Yet the calm we feel now is not false. It is the calm of a moment fully belonging to its larger movement. There is a kind of mercy in landscapes that do not hide change. The Coorong shows drying, salt, exposure, return, and adaptation openly. It does not pretend that permanence means sameness. It offers instead a more spacious idea. that a place can remain itself by changing in ways shaped by its own character. This is a slow and forgiving thought. The ancient feeling also comes from the silence between human markers. Out here, the lagoon's main presences are water, sand, salt, plants, birds, sky and wind. Human history and management matter deeply, but the sensory field remains elemental. You hear surf, you smell brine, you see low light on mud. The body recognizes these things as older than speech. As night deepens, the Coorong's time becomes harder to measure. Without strong shadows, the landscape loses sharp boundaries. The water darkens into the land. The dune darkens into the sky. Sounds arrive without visible sources. Minutes feel longer. The mind, no longer held by bright detail, begins to drift in the wetland's wider sense of duration. And as our sense of time loosens beside the lagoon, we move toward the quiet chemistry of oxygen, nutrients, and clarity, the hidden balances that make this strange place breathe. Oxygen in shallow water can change through the day and night. Plants and algae may produce it in light, while animals, microbes, and decomposing material use it continuously. In calm, warm, or highly productive waters, oxygen levels can shift noticeably. In wind-stirred water, mixing may help. The Coorong's shallow basins are therefore not chemically still, even when the surface looks peaceful. You do not need to hold the chemistry tightly. Imagine instead the lagoon breathing differently with light. Morning brings a pale brightness over algae and plants. Day warms the water and feeds photosynthesis where clarity allows. Evening lowers light. Night continues respiration in darkness. The water's invisible character changes, molecule by molecule, beneath stars and wind. It is a soft, hidden pulse. Nutrients move through the Coorong in complex ways. They may arrive from inflows, from sediment, from decomposing plants and animals, from bird activity, and from the broader catchment. Too little nutrient can limit growth. Too much can encourage blooms or imbalance, depending on conditions. Wetlands are skilled at processing nutrients, but each system has thresholds. The Coorong's thresholds are shaped by salinity, depth, exchange, and time. Clarity matters because light must reach submerged plants. When sediment is suspended, or when algal growth clouds the water, underwater meadows may struggle. When water is clearer, plants can receive more light and stabilize the bottom in return. This creates a gentle feedback, where plants help conditions that help plants. If the system shifts away, returning can take patience and favorable years. You can imagine looking into the lagoon on a calm, clear morning. The surface opens like glass. Beneath it, you see pale sand, darker mud, perhaps strands of aquatic plants moving with tiny currents. A small fish flickers out of sight. Light trembles on the bottom. The whole scene feels fragile, as though one strong wind could cloud it, and yet for this moment, it is clear. Now imagine the same place after wind. The water is browner, stirred with fine sediment. Reflections break into smaller pieces. The bottom disappears. Birds still move along the edge, but the underwater world is hidden. Neither scene is more true than the other. The Coorong contains both clarity and cloudiness, and its life responds to the difference. This responsiveness is the heart of many wetlands. They are not just containers for water. They are dynamic systems where physics, chemistry, and biology continually alter one another. The Coorong saline wetlands make this especially apparent because they are shallow, saline, long, and close to thresholds. A single change can move through the system in visible and invisible ways. For the sleeping mind, thresholds can be softened into transitions. Wakefulness becomes drowsiness. Thought becomes image. Image becomes sensation. Sensation becomes quiet. The Coorong does this too, moving between states without hard edges. Its science, when spoken slowly, begins to resemble the very rhythm it describes. Water changing under light, salt gathering under sun, life waiting under silence. And as the hidden chemistry continues beneath the dark surface, we let ourselves drift toward morning again, when the Coorong reappears gradually rather than all at once. Before sunrise, the Coorong saline wetlands are mostly tone and outline. The sky pales first at the edge. and the lagoon receives that paleness without brightness. The dunes appear as a low charcoal line. Birds are still shapes. The air is cool against the skin, and the salt smell feels cleaner before heat returns. Everything seems to be waiting, but not impatiently. Then small details begin to separate from the dimness. A reed head becomes visible. A patch of samphire takes on color. The water changes from black to gray, then to blue-gray with hints of silver. Mudflats emerge from shadow as smooth plains. A bird steps forward, and its reflection appears beneath it like a thought returning. Morning does not break here. It arrives. As light increases, so does activity. Birds begin feeding with renewed precision. Insects lift from low vegetation. Fish may move in channels where conditions suit them. Algae and plants receive sunlight again. The wetland's daily cycle turns without ceremony. What seemed deeply still in darkness reveals itself as ready, not inactive. The Coorong has simply been continuing in a quieter register. Dawn can make salinity visible in a new way. Pale crusts shine before the rest of the ground brightens. Moist mud reflects the sky in low, blue patches. Shallow water near the edge may show faint color differences where depth or sediment changes. The whole lagoon becomes legible slowly, like writing appearing on paper. You do not have to read every word. It is enough to feel the page. This morning light also shows why the Coorong feels strange to many who first encounter it. It is beautiful, but not lush. It is watery, but also dry-edged. It is coastal, but not simply marine. It is a wetland, but often saline enough to challenge ordinary expectations of wetland life. It is quiet, yet internationally important for birds and ecological processes. Its contradictions are gentle, but persistent. You can let those contradictions remain unresolved. They do not need to be turned into a neat answer. The title asks why the Coorong saline wetlands are so strange, and the lagoon answers in layers. Because of salt? Because of sand? Because of river and sea? Because of shallow water? Because of waiting life? Because of change that looks like stillness? Each answer is true, and each is incomplete. There is pleasure in incompleteness when it is calm. A place does not have to be exhausted by explanation to be understood enough for wonder. The Coorong keeps something of itself beyond our naming, as all living landscapes do. We can learn its processes and still feel its mystery. In fact, learning the processes often makes the mystery more tender. The morning wind begins lightly, hardly more than movement across the face. The water wrinkles. A few birds lift and settle. The distant ocean resumes its fuller sound as the day opens. The lagoon's long line catches light from end to end, and for a moment, the Coorong seems to be made of nothing but water, air, and held breath. And as the day opens across the saline wetlands, we move deeper into the question of balance, because every strange beauty here depends on relationships that must keep adjusting. Balance in the Coorong saline wetlands is not a fixed point, held perfectly in one place. It is more like a slow conversation among water, salt, wind, sand, plants, birds, and time. The balance leans, recovers, leans again, and becomes visible through small signs. A shoreline shifts, a plant bed strengthens, a flock gathers, a pool clears. The wetland is always finding its next poise. You can feel this kind of balance in your own body as you listen. It is not rigid stillness, but a gentle adjusting. Breath enters, breath leaves. Muscles soften, then soften a little more. Thoughts move, then lose their edges. The Coorong offers the same pattern at landscape scale, because it too is never perfectly still, and yet it remains calm enough to hold the sky. Fresh water is one side of this balance. It arrives through river influence, rainfall, and local flows when conditions allow. It dilutes salt, changes habitat, supports particular plants, and opens pathways for some fish and invertebrates. But too much water at the wrong time can also cover feeding flats, or alter conditions for species using exposed margins. The wetland does not simply ask for more of one thing, it asks for timing. Salt water and salinity form another side. Marine influence helps maintain estuarine character near the mouth, while evaporation concentrates salt farther along the lagoon. Salinity can support specialized life and create the Coorong's unique ecological pattern. Yet beyond certain thresholds, some plants and animals struggle. The line is not moral or dramatic, it is physiological, chemical, and seasonal, written into bodies that must keep their internal water in balance. Wind adds motion to this delicate arrangement. It can stir sediment, shift shallow water, cool surfaces, and shape evaporation. It can make one shoreline temporarily wetter and another more exposed. In a landscape this flat, wind is almost a sculptor, though it uses no solid tool. It presses softly across the lagoon, and the wetland answers with ripples, cloudiness, exposed mud, or a new shimmer of light. Sand holds the shape in which all this happens. The dunes keep the ocean near, but not fully present. The mouth allows exchange, but can be altered by sediment. The shoreline forms basins, flats, channels, and edges. Without sand, the Coorong would not have its long sheltered body. Without movement, the sand would not remain part of the living story. Even the boundary is in motion. Plants contribute to balance in quieter ways. Submerged plants may help stabilize sediment and support food webs when conditions suit them. Salt marsh plants bind margins, trap fine particles, and create shelter. Reeds and other vegetation mark fresher or more protected zones. Each plant community says something about water and salt. The Coorong's botany is not decoration. It is a form of listening made green, red, bronze, and brown. Birds then make the balance visible at a larger scale. When water levels expose mudflats, waders arrive. When fish are accessible, pelicans may feed. When temporary wetlands fill, other birds may use them. A quiet lagoon can become full of movement because several hidden balances have aligned. You watch the birds and realize they are not just visitors. They are living evidence that the wetland has opened a door. The strange thing is that no single balance lasts forever. A place useful to one species in one season may be less useful later. A basin may freshen, then become saline again. A plant bed may expand, then retreat. A shoreline may offer mud today and water tomorrow. The Coorong's health is not sameness. It is the capacity to keep offering varied conditions through time. This idea can be restful if we let it be. We do not need every part of ourselves to stay constant either. Some inner places are full of water. Some are dry and waiting. Some are salty with old memory. Some are ready for birds. The Coorong does not judge its own changing states. It simply moves through them, and the night around it remains wide. And as that wide night holds the changing lagoon, we move toward the old connection between the Coorong and the lower lakes, where inland water slows before finding the sea. Lake Alexandrina and Lake Albert sit upstream from the Coorong's northern reaches, broad shallow waters at the end of the Murray system. They are part of the same wider story, where river water, lake water, estuary, barrages, mouth, and lagoon are linked. You do not have to see all of them at once. It is enough to sense them as a chain of low waters, each affecting the next. The lower lakes can seem calm and open, with wide surfaces that catch wind and sky. Their relationship with the Coorong has been shaped by barrages that manage water levels and reduce seawater intrusion into the lakes. This management has altered natural exchange, creating a system where freshwater, brackish water, and saline lagoon conditions are carefully separated and sometimes reconnected. The landscape remains natural in feeling, but its hydrology carries human design. We speak of this gently because the Coorong's strangeness includes both ancient processes and modern alterations. A wetland can be deeply natural and still changed. It can hold pelicans, salt marsh, dunes, and migratory birds, while also responding to gates, dredging, flows, and decisions made far upstream. None of that breaks the calm of the place tonight. It only adds another layer beneath the surface. When fresh water passes through or near the system, it can help reduce salinity, support estuarine conditions, and influence habitat quality. During very dry periods, reduced inflows can allow salinity to rise, especially in the southern lagoon. During wetter periods or managed releases, parts of the system may freshen. These shifts do not happen in isolation. The Coorong receives the state of a much larger river basin. That is one reason it feels so quietly significant. You can stand beside a narrow saline lagoon and be connected to rainfall far inland, snowmelt in distant uplands, irrigation across plains, evaporation from lakes, and the old force of the sea. The place itself may look sparse, but its connections are vast. A single ripple near your feet belongs to a whole continent's water story. The lower lakes also remind us that shallow water can be powerful without being deep. Wind can push lake water. Evaporation can matter greatly. Salinity can shift with inflow and exchange. Birds can use broad margins. Plants can alter sediment and habitat. The Coorong belongs to this family of shallow systems, where surface area, wind, and light are often more influential than depth. You can imagine the transition from lake to mouth to lagoon as a slow loosening of categories. Freshwater lake, managed barrage, estuarine mixing. Sandy mouth, saline lagoon. Hypersaline reaches. Each name is helpful, but the water itself does not care for sharp definitions. It moves where it can, gathers what it carries, and changes as it goes. The Coorong is strange because it lives in these gradations. At the edges of the lower lakes, reeds and rushes may stand in softer water, while farther along the Coorong, samphire and salt marsh take a larger role. The vegetation shifts as the water changes. Birds shift with the habitat. Sediments shift with energy and chemistry. The whole connected system becomes a quiet procession from inland freshness toward coastal salinity, though the path is never simple. This procession is easy to imagine at dusk. The inland waters cool under a broad sky. Channels darken. The mouth murmurs with moving water and sand. The Coorong stretches southward, receiving less freshness, more salt, and more silence. You are not traveling quickly through it. You are drifting along the idea of it, letting each connected water become the next in a slow, breathing sequence. And as the sequence carries us farther from the lakes again, the Coorong's southern silence returns, where the wetland's most unusual salinity gathers under open sky. The southern lagoon of the Coorong Saline Wetlands can feel like a world refined by evaporation. The water may be shallow, bright, and strongly saline. The margins may show pale mineral traces, while low vegetation keeps to places it can tolerate. Distance feels especially strong here. With fewer tall forms around you, the horizon seems to draw the mind outward until thought itself becomes thin. Strong salinity changes the food web. Some organisms disappear from the most saline reaches, while tolerant algae, microbes, and invertebrates may remain or flourish under certain conditions. Birds use these areas when food and water depth suit them, but the available menu may differ from less saline parts of the lagoon. In such places, ecological richness may be concentrated in particular windows rather than spread evenly across time. You can picture a shallow saline basin at noon. The water is almost too bright to look at directly. The sky is reflected in broken patches, a fringe of white salt marks where water has lowered. The wind lifts tiny ripples that travel quickly because the basin is so shallow. There is a smell of brine and warm mineral earth. Nothing moves fast, but everything feels sharpened by salt. At evening, the same basin changes character. Glare falls away. The salt rim becomes softly luminous. The water turns grey, then violet. A few birds may walk in the shallows, their legs making small dark marks against the reflected sky. The air cools, and the mineral edge softens. What felt stark in daylight becomes tranquil, almost lunar, with a quiet that seems to descend rather than spread. The science of hypersalinity is often a science of limits. Water leaves, salt remains. Organisms either tolerate the concentration, move away, or wait for better conditions in resistant forms. Yet limits can create specialized beauty. In saline ponds around the world, unusual colors, microbial mats, and distinct invertebrate communities appear because only certain lives can flourish there. The Coorong shares in that larger family of salt-shaped landscapes. This does not make the southern lagoon lesser than fresher reaches. It makes it different. Its ecological value may depend on particular organisms, particular bird uses, and its role in the whole system's gradient. Gradients need ends as well as middles. The strongly saline parts help define the Coorong's full character, just as the quietest rooms help define a house. You may notice how calming it is to let difference exist without ranking it. Fresh water has one softness. Saline water has another. Mudflat, salt marsh, dune, open water, channel, and basin all have their own ways of holding life. The Coorong saline wetlands are strange, partly because they make this variety visible in a long, low sequence, with no single form claiming to be the answer. The southern silence also changes how we imagine sound. Fewer trees mean fewer leaves. Open flats mean sounds travel lightly and fade cleanly. A bird call may seem small against the basin. Wind may be the main voice. Salt crust may crackle under a slow step. The ocean may be distant or hidden. The hush is not empty. It is spacious enough to hold small sounds without crowding them. And as that spaciousness settles around us, we turn toward the shorelines again, where changing water levels draw and redraw the wetland's delicate edges. The edge of the Coorong is never only a line, it is a zone, sometimes wet, sometimes dry, sometimes crusted with salt, sometimes soft enough to take a print. Water levels rise and fall with wind, season, inflow, evaporation, and local conditions. A shoreline that looks fixed from a distance may be shifting daily in small ways. The wetland's edge is a conversation. When water retreats, it reveals mudflats, sandflats, shells, plant remains, and salt marks. Birds may feed on newly exposed surfaces. Sunday may dry the upper layer into a delicate skin. Microbes may form films. Small invertebrates may become available to probing bills. The retreat of water is not simply loss. In wetlands, exposure can create habitat, as long as it occurs within patterns life can use. When water returns, it softens crusts, fills cracks, covers tracks, and reconnects pools. Tiny animals may move again. Seeds may respond. Sediment may release nutrients. The same surface becomes aquatic for a while, then terrestrial again, then something in between. The Coorong's margins teach the mind to accept transformation without needing to call one phase complete. You can imagine watching a single flat through several days. On the first day, it is submerged under a hand's breadth of water. On the next, wind pushes the water away, and the mud shines. Later, it dries enough to hold bird prints. Then rain comes, and a thin sheet of water returns. Nothing has happened quickly, yet the habitat has changed 4 times. The same place has become many. For the organisms that use these margins, timing is everything. A shorebird needs exposed mud when it arrives. A plant needs suitable moisture and salinity when it germinates. An invertebrate may need water long enough to complete part of its life cycle. Fish may need a connected channel. The Coorong's edge is therefore not merely scenic, it is a calendar written in mud and water. This is why water level management matters so much in altered systems. It is not only the amount of water, but when and how it arrives, how long it stays, and where it can move. The Coorong saline wetlands respond to these details. Their strange beauty is also a sensitive beauty, dependent on rhythms that match biological needs across many species and processes. Yet tonight, we remain in the sensory calm of those edges. The mud is cool beneath a thin film of water. A salt rim gleams faintly. Low plants cast small shadows. The wind touches the surface and draws faint lines toward shore. A bird steps forward, pauses, and steps again. You can almost hear the softness of its feet, though the sound is too small to reach you. There is a kind of sleep in this repeated covering and uncovering. The land closes its eyes under water, then opens them as the water lowers. It dreams in mud, salt, shell, and seed. It wakes as birds arrive to read the surface. Then it is covered again, and the writing changes. The Coorong rests and reappears, with no need for haste. And as the margins breathe in this slow way, we follow one strand of the food web from the smallest films to the larger birds waiting in the distance. A film of algae on Coorong mud may look like nothing more than shine, yet that shine can feed tiny grazers. Those grazers can feed small fish or invertebrate-eating birds. Plant detritus can feed microbes and animals in the sediment. Each step is modest, but together they become the food web that supports visible life. The lagoon's calm surface is built on many quiet exchanges. You can trace the path gently. Sunlight touches shallow water. Algae and aquatic plants use it to grow. Small animals feed on them or shelter among them. Larger animals feed on the smaller ones. Birds feed where the water level makes food reachable. Then droppings, feathers, plant fragments, and animal remains return nutrients to mud and water. The circle is not perfect, but it is continuous. In a saline system, each link must tolerate the conditions of the moment. If salinity rises beyond the comfort of one organism, that link may weaken and another may become more important. If water freshens, a different community may appear. Food webs in the Coorong are therefore flexible, but they also have limits. Their flexibility is part of the strange intelligence of the wetland. You may see only the final expression of that food web: a pelican feeding, a sandpiper probing, a duck dabbling, a tern turning above the water. These birds are like visible notes from a song being played mostly below hearing. The mud, microbes, plants, and small animals are the lower tones. The whole system becomes music only when all the parts have enough room to sound. This is a restful way to think about ecology, not as a diagram, sharp and boxed, but as a low, interwoven melody. Some notes are faint, some return seasonally. Some fade during dry years and strengthen in wetter ones. The Coorong Saline Wetlands do not play the same music every day, yet the instruments remain recognizable. Salt, water, light, sediment, plant, bird, and wind. At times, algae may grow abundantly in response to nutrients, temperature, and light. At other times, plant beds may support a more structured habitat. Invertebrate populations may rise when conditions suit them, then decline or shift. Birds respond to these pulses. The wetland's food web is not a steady table, always laid the same way. It is a sequence of offerings, each one shaped by condition. When you understand this, the quiet surface becomes less empty. A patch of still water may be incubating change. A mudflat may be full of buried life. A seemingly barren salt edge may be part of the system's mineral rhythm. The eye becomes kinder. It stops asking for obvious abundance and begins to receive subtle abundance, which is often what the Coorong has to give. We can let that kindness turn inward. Not every valuable thing in you needs to be visible tonight. Some parts may be resting below the surface. Some may be waiting for a gentler season. Some may be quietly feeding the visible parts of your life without asking for attention. The Coorong offers that thought without sentiment, simply by being a landscape where hidden processes matter. And as hidden processes keep turning beneath the shallow water, we move toward the pelican colonies and resting places, where large white birds gather in the middle distance like soft fragments of cloud. Pelicans are among the most recognizable presences of the Coorong, and their calm size suits the landscape. They float low and steady, with broad bodies and folded wings, looking almost too large for such shallow water. When they lift into the air, they do so with slow strength, then settle into gliding lines. Their movements are spacious, and the lagoon seems to make room around them. The Coorong region has long been important for Australian pelicans, including nesting on islands when conditions are suitable. These birds need relative safety, food availability, and appropriate water conditions. Their life here is connected to fish movement, water levels, and the wider health of the system. Yet to the sleepy eye, they are simply pale forms resting in a quiet place, held by water that reflects the sky. A group of pelicans can look like a temporary shoreline. They gather, separate, turn, and realign. Their white bodies catch the last light while the water darkens around them. Sometimes one preens with slow care, drawing its bill through feathers. Another tucks its head and rests. The whole group seems to breathe at the pace of the lagoon, with no hurry to become anything else. Large birds change the scale of the Coorong. A tiny wader makes the mudflat feel intricate. A pelican makes the open water feel broad and ceremonial. Both are true. The wetland holds delicate life and heavy-bodied grace. It offers narrow feeding edges and wide resting surfaces. Its strangeness includes this ability to support very different ways of being in the same shallow world. Pelicans also remind us that calm is not the same as emptiness. Their resting bodies contain long flights, feeding effort, nesting cycles, and social movements. They may look still, but stillness is a useful state, conserving energy and maintaining presence. In sleep, too, stillness is not absence. It is maintenance, restoration, and quiet continuation beneath the level of conscious effort. You can imagine one pelican crossing the darkening lagoon. Its wake widens behind it in two soft lines. The surface closes slowly after it passes. The bird does not seem to disturb the place so much as belong to its movement. When it lowers its head, the reflection bends. When it lifts its bill, a few drops fall back like brief stars. The Coorong Saline Wetlands are strange because they can feel almost empty until a bird reveals their scale. Then you see that the open water is not blankness, but room. Room to float, room to gather, room to feed when food is present, room for light to travel and wine to pass. The wetland's spare appearance becomes part of its generosity. Near nesting or resting areas, disturbance matters, though we do not dwell on tension. Birds need space. They need the comfort of distance. The Coorong's low islands, bars, and protected reaches can provide that when conditions align. From far away, we can admire without intruding. That distance itself becomes peaceful, a way of watching that leaves the watched world undisturbed. And as the pelicans settle into the distance, we let our attention pass to smaller shorebirds again, the ones that make the mud seem alive with careful steps. Small shorebirds bring delicacy to the Coorong Saline Wetlands. They move with lightness, often in groups, each body small against the wide lagoon. Their legs are fine. Their bills are shaped for particular feeding styles. Some probe deeper, some pick at the surface, some run and pause along the waterline. The mud receives them tenderly, holding their tracks for a while. The differences among shorebirds are a quiet science of form and function. Bill length, leg length, body size, and feeding behavior all influence which part of the wetland each species can use. A bird with a longer bill may reach prey deeper in soft mud. A shorter-billed bird may feed near the surface. Slight differences open different niches, so the same flat can support many kinds of attention. When a flock feeds, the movements can become almost hypnotic. Step, dip, pause, step again. A ripple touches the ankles, a bill enters the mud and comes out clean. The birds turn together without colliding, as if each knows the invisible spacing of the group. Now and then, many lift at once, circle in a low arc, and settle a little farther along the shore. For migratory species, such feeding is essential. They must rebuild energy reserves after long travel or prepare for the next journey. The Coorong's mudflats and shallows become a table set by salinity, water level, and invertebrate life. If the table is well set, birds can rest and feed. If not, they must search elsewhere. The wetland's quiet conditions ripple into distant lives. You can hear small shorebirds before seeing them sometimes. Fine calls cross the air like threads. They do not break the calm. They stitch it. In the fading light, their bodies may become silhouettes, then small moving shadows. Their reflections appear and vanish with ripples. The entire scene is so delicate that your own breathing seems to become quieter out of respect. The Coorong is strange because it asks large-scale care for small-scale needs. A few centimeters of water can determine whether a bird can feed. The salinity of a pool can determine which invertebrates are present. The opening of a mouth can influence exchange that affects the whole gradient. Great ecological importance may rest in details that could fit inside a footprint. This thought deepens the sense of wonder without waking the mind too sharply. The world is not only made of grand gestures, it is made of thresholds, tolerances, timings, and soft repetitions. The Coorong Saline Wetlands reveal these things in a landscape spare enough for them to be felt. You can rest with the idea that small accuracies matter, even in a vast open place. As the flock settles again, the mudflat returns to near stillness. The birds continue feeding, but from a distance. Their movements merge into texture. The sky darkens. The waterline becomes harder to see. Salt and reflection become one pale band. The Coorong keeps its birds close to the edge between visible and invisible, which is also where sleep begins to gather, and as sleep gathers near that edge, we turn softly toward the cultural and ancient human presence of the place, only as a quiet awareness that this wetland has been known and lived with for a very long time. The Coorong Saline Wetlands are not empty of human meaning, though tonight we keep our focus on the natural landscape. The Garangiri people have deep connections with the lands and waters of this region, with knowledge, stories, and care held across generations. That presence belongs to the place as surely as wind, birds, salt, and dunes. It reminds us that landscapes are not only observed, they are known. We do not need to enter stories that are not ours to tell. It is enough to speak with respect and quietness. Long before modern science measured salinity or mapped habitats, people understood these waters through season, movement, food, ceremony, and relationship. The Coorong's strangeness to a visitor may not be strangeness to those whose knowledge is rooted here. What seems unusual from outside may be deeply familiar from within. This awareness changes the feeling of the lagoon gently. The place is ancient in geology, alive in ecology, and held in cultural memory. Its birds and fish, plants and waters, dunes and mouth are part of more than one kind of knowledge. Scientific understanding and cultural knowledge are not the same, but both can deepen respect. The wetland becomes quieter, not because it is empty, but because it carries meaning carefully. You can imagine standing at the edge without taking possession of the view. The water moves. The salt air touches the face. The dunes lie low beyond the lagoon. Birds feed in the shallows. The scene is not there only for us. It belongs to itself, to its living communities, and to the people whose connection with it reaches far back in time. That humility is restful. It lets the listener stop grasping. We do not have to explain everything, name everything, or own every story. We can be present gently, learning what is appropriate to learn and leaving what should remain held by others. The Coorong invites this kind of quiet observation because so much of its life already depends on leaving enough space. Even the act of watching birds from a distance becomes a model. We can admire without approaching too closely. We can listen without demanding every sound become information. We can notice salt, water, mud, and plant without turning the whole place into a list. Respect, like sleep, often begins when the body stops reaching and begins to receive. The Coorong Saline Wetlands, in this sense, are strange, because they resist easy possession. They are not simple scenery. They are a living system, a cultural landscape, a managed estuary, a geological formation, a bird refuge, a saline gradient, and a place of immense quiet. Any single description leaves something out. The wetland remains larger than the sentence. As we stand there, that largeness feels gentle, rather than overwhelming. The lagoon does not press its significance upon us. It simply continues under the sky. Water reflects. Birds feed. Salt gathers. Wind moves over samphire. The distant ocean breathes beyond the sand. The mind can bow inwardly to the place, then become quiet again. And as quiet returns, we move back into the natural rhythms of the Coorong, where the passing of clouds can alter the whole surface of the lagoon. Clouds over the Coorong Saline Wetlands can change the water faster than wind. A clear sky gives the lagoon a bright, open face. Thin cloud turns it pearly. Heavier cloud lowers the color into gray-green, pewter, or soft brown. Because the water is shallow and reflective, the sky seems to enter it completely. The wetland becomes a weather mirror, changing mood without changing shape. You can feel a cloud pass even with your eyes closed. The warmth on the skin fades slightly. The glare behind your eyelids softens. The air may seem cooler for a moment. Birds continue feeding, but the whole scene lowers in tone. When light returns, salt edges brighten again and the water lifts back towards silver. The Coorong responds to overhead changes with immediacy. This responsiveness is part of its beauty. Some landscapes absorb weather slowly. The Coorong shows it at once. Sun, cloud, wind, rain and temperature all find quick expression in shallow water and open flats. A shower can darken sand and soften salt. A dry wind can crisp edges again. A calm morning can make the lagoon glassy, while an afternoon breeze breaks it into moving scales. Clouds also affect how we perceive distance. Under bright sun, far water may vanish into glare. Under cloud, the long lagoon may become more legible, its margins and channels clearer. Mist or haze can shorten the world, making dunes, birds, and water feel closer. The Coorong's strangeness changes with visibility, revealing itself sometimes through openness and sometimes through concealment. Rain has its own softness here. It dimples the lagoon. It releases scent from dry mud and plants. It washes salt from leaves and crusts, at least briefly. In temporary basins, it begins the return of water. On dunes, it darkens the sand and settles dust. A rain shower over the Coorong can feel less like interruption than like the landscape being gently tuned. After rain, the air may smell rounder, less sharp with salt alone. Wet sand, damp samphire, and shallow water blend into a calmer scent. Birds may shift positions as surfaces soften. Tiny channels may begin to run for a while. The lagoon's color deepens under cloud, and reflections become blurred. You can imagine the whole wetland exhaling after heat. Yet rain in this landscape is not the opposite of salt. It enters a system already shaped by minerals, evaporation, and exchange. Freshness arrives temporarily, mixing with what was there before. The Coorong does not reset to some simple beginning. It incorporates the rain into its ongoing chemistry. This is another gentle lesson. Relief does not erase history. It joins it. As clouds pass and the light opens again, the wetland seems newly made, though it is the same place. A salt crust has softened. A pool has widened. A bird has moved to a fresh edge. The dunes hold drops briefly before they vanish into sand. Everything has changed a little, and nothing has been hurried. The Coorong continues its slow art of adjustment, and as adjustment carries us onward, we turn toward the silence between sounds, because the soundscape of the Coorong is one of its deepest forms of calm. The Coorong saline wetlands are not silent in an absolute sense. They are full of small sounds that have room around them. Water strokes mud. Wind passes through low plants. Distant surf folds and unfolds beyond the dunes. Birds call, settle, and call again. Insects make fine dry notes near vegetation. The silence is not the absence of sound. It is the space that lets each sound rest. You may hear the ocean as a low, continuous presence. It is close, but softened by sand. That softened roar gives the lagoon a background rhythm, like breath heard from another room. The nearer sounds are finer. Ripple, reed, wing, footstep, and the faint shifting of salt crust under cooling air. Together, they create a soundscape that does not demand attention, but slowly gathers it. This is one reason the Coorong feels restful, even when complex. Its processes are intricate, but its sounds are sparse. There are no steep echoes, no sudden drops, no rushing cascades. The land is low and open, so sound travels outward and thins. A bird call may seem to hang for a moment, then dissolve into the water's surface. The place has a natural hush. In wetlands with dense reeds or forested margins, sound can feel enclosed. Here, much of the sound feels exposed to sky. It rises and fades without walls. This open acoustic space matches the visual space, creating a feeling of breadth. Your thoughts may begin to behave like those sounds, appearing gently and then losing definition across the wide interior quiet. The Coorong sound also changes with water level. When water reaches reeds, it makes small tapping noises. When mudflats are exposed, footsteps of birds become more visible than audible. When wind rises, ripples gather into a soft, continuous brushing along the margin. When the air is still, Even distant calls seem close. The wetland's voice is therefore another measure of its condition. Listening can reveal the strange closeness of sea and lagoon. The ocean's surf continues beyond the dunes, energetic but muffled. The lagoon beside us remains shallow and restrained. One sound is large and distant. The other is small and near. Between them, your body settles into a middle state, aware of vast motion but held by still water. If you are half asleep, the sounds may blend into a single low atmosphere. Surf becomes breath. Wind becomes breath. Water becomes breath. Bird calls appear like small thoughts and fade. The Coorong saline wetlands become less a place you look at and more a place you hear through the body. The darkness around the lagoon deepens, and the mind loosens its grip on edges. There is science even in this softness. Sound travels differently over open water, through vegetation, across sand, and under varying humidity and wind. Birds use sound to communicate across space. Wind noise can mask or reveal calls. The low topography gives little echo, but we do not need to make the science sharp. We let it sit behind the listening like sediment beneath clear water. And as the listening grows slower, we move once more toward the texture of the ground, where sand, mud, shell, and salt hold the wetlands quiet underfoot. The ground around the Coorong saline wetlands changes from step to step. Sand may be loose near dunes, firmer where damp, and rippled where wind has combed it. Mud may be smooth, cracked or patterned by birds. Salt may lie as a crust, thin enough to break softly or thick enough to shine. Shell fragments may gather in pale lines along former water levels. The earth is varied. Under bare feet in imagination, each texture would speak differently. Sand would yield and cool. Mud would cling and hold pressure. Salt crust would feel brittle, then granular. Damp flats would be slick and smooth. Vegetation would brush the ankles with low, succulent stems. The Coorong sensory world is not lushly layered upward, but richly layered downward, where the body meets the ground. These textures tell ecological stories. Fine mud can host burrowing invertebrates and feeding birds. Sandier areas drain differently and support other communities. Salt crusts indicate evaporation and mineral accumulation. Shell lines mark past water movement and biological remains. Cracked surfaces speak of drying. Smooth wet sheens speak of recent exposure. The ground is readable if we slow down enough to read. There is something soothing in this earth-level attention. It brings the mind away from large questions and into immediate sensation. Cool mud, pale salt, dry sand, a feather, a reed stem, a tiny track. The Coorong's strangeness becomes touchable, not because we disturb it, but because we imagine its textures with care. The landscape enters through the senses before it becomes explanation. Sediment also shapes water quality. Fine particles can cloud the lagoon when stirred. Coarser sands may settle quickly. Organic rich mud can influence oxygen and nutrient cycling. Places with plants may hold sediment more firmly. Bare places may resuspend more easily under wind. Thus the feel of the ground is linked to the clarity of water, the growth of plants, and the feeding of birds. You can see how everything joins quietly. Wind stirs sediment. Sediment affects light. Light affects plants. Plants affect sediment again. Small animals use the plants and mud. Birds feed on the animals. Salt changes which participants can remain. The Coorong saline wetlands are strange because their simplicity of appearance conceals these circular relationships, each one turning slowly beneath the surface. At the margin, a footprint might fill with water and then collapse. A bird track might last until the next wavelet. Salt might grow around a twig and then dissolve in rain. The ground records events briefly, then lets them go. This impermanence is not sad tonight. It is part of the wetland's restfulness. Nothing needs to be held forever. As you grow quieter, the textures blur into a single feeling of low, cool earth beside saline water. The dunes lie behind. The lagoon lies ahead. The sky is open. Somewhere in the darkness, small creatures continue their work in mud and plants. The ground under us is not solid in the way stone is solid. It is receptive, changeable and softly alive. And as the ground receives the night, we follow the idea of receptiveness into the wider catchment, because the Coorong receives more than water from its own shores. The Coorong Saline Wetlands sit at the end of an enormous river story. The Murray-Darling Basin reaches far inland, across varied climates, soils, farms, floodplains, towns, forests and dry country. By the time water approaches the Coorong, it carries traces of distant rain and distant choices. The lagoon is coastal, but it is also the receiving edge of inland Australia. This makes the wetlands strange in scale. It is narrow when you stand beside it, but vast in connection. A change in rainfall far away can influence flows that eventually affect salinity near the mouth. Water use upstream can alter how much freshness arrives. Floods can bring renewal from beyond the visible horizon. Drought can tighten the whole system into salt and exposure. The Coorong is both local and continental. You can imagine a raindrop falling far inland, on red soil or grassland, or a hillside where the Murray system begins gathering itself. It may enter a creek, a river, a floodplain, a reservoir, a channel, a lake. Its path may be interrupted, delayed, diverted, evaporated, or carried onward. If it reaches the lower Murray, it approaches the Coorong as part of a long collective movement. By the time that water nears the mouth, it has changed identity many times. It has touched soils, plants, sediments, sunlight, and human systems. It has warmed and cooled. It has carried dissolved minerals and fine particles. It has been slowed by lakes and channels. When it meets the saline lagoon, it is not simply fresh water. It is inland time, arriving at the coast. The Coorong receives this arrival quietly. There is no ceremony when a molecule of river water mixes with brackish water. There is only dilution, movement, chemistry, and the living response that follows. A plant may find conditions slightly easier. A fish may move into a channel. A mudflat may change depth. A bird may feed where it could not before. Large stories become small openings. This receiving role can feel heavy if we think too sharply about pressure and management. But in the script's slow night, we hold it as interconnectedness. The lagoon is not alone. It belongs to weather systems, inland rivers, coastal currents, dunes, groundwater, and living migrations. Its strangeness comes partly from being the place where so many journeys finally become shallow and visible. When flows are strong enough, the mouth may maintain better exchange with the sea. When flows are low, sediment can become more difficult, and salinity patterns may intensify. The Coorong's dependence on connection is therefore physical and ecological. Isolation may look peaceful, but too much isolation can strain a wetland that evolved with movement. Calm is healthiest when it includes flow. You can let that thought become personal without becoming sharp. Rest is not total isolation. Sleep itself is a form of connection to breath, body, darkness, and rhythm. The Coorong rests beside the sea while still needing exchange. It lies quiet while still receiving water. It reminds us that stillness and connection can belong together, like lagoon and tide, like dune and wind. And as the catchment's long story fades into the background, we return to the immediate shore, where a single strand of seagrass-like rupiah can hold the attention as gently as a whole map. A strand of rupiah in the Coorong is slender, almost modest, swaying beneath shallow water when conditions allow. It does not look like a forest, yet for small aquatic animals it can provide shelter and surface. Its seeds and structures can support food webs. Its presence can suggest a more favorable balance of salinity, depth, and clarity. It is a small plant with a large meaning. You can picture the water around it as tea-clear or greenish, depending on light and suspended particles. The plant bends with a ripple, then straightens. Fine sediment rests around its base. Tiny bubbles cling to nearby surfaces. A small invertebrate moves along a stem, barely visible. Above, a bird passes, and its shadow glides over the underwater plant for a moment before vanishing. Rupiah has life cycles tied to water conditions. It may germinate, grow, flower, and set seed when depth, salinity, and timing are suitable. If water becomes too saline, too shallow too soon, too turbid, or otherwise unfavorable, reproduction can be reduced. This makes the plant a sensitive indicator of the wetland's state. Its quiet growth can speak clearly to those who know how to listen. The Coorong saline wetlands have experienced periods when rupia and related food resources were reduced, especially during drought and high salinity. Recovery requires suitable conditions over time. This kind of ecological recovery is rarely instant. It may depend on seed banks, water management, weather, and the return of interacting species. In the landscape, hope can look like a few green stems beneath shallow water. There is something deeply calming about the scale of such hope. It does not arrive as a grand declaration. It arrives as germination, clarity, a manageable salt level, a season that lasts long enough. It arrives in underwater movement almost too subtle to see. The Coorong teaches that renewal often begins below the level of spectacle, in the patient work of growth. For birds, plant recovery can matter indirectly as well as directly. Vegetated areas may support invertebrate communities, influence sediment, and contribute to food resources. Seeds and plant material may be used by some species. The structure of underwater meadows can change where small animals live. A plant stem becomes part of a larger web, though it remains thin enough to sway with the faintest current. You can imagine a calm afternoon when the water is clear enough to see these stems. The world above is bright and wide. The world below is close and green, with moving lines of light. Your gaze shifts between sky reflection and underwater detail, and for a moment, the lagoon seems to hold two worlds in one shallow pane. The Coorong is strange because its depth is layered rather than deep. As evening returns, those underwater details disappear. The surface darkens first, then the bottom fades. The plants remain, but the eye can no longer follow them. This disappearance is gentle. It lets the mind release the need to see. What matters can continue unseen. The lagoon does not stop being alive when darkness covers it, and as darkness covers the submerged stems, we move toward the islands, bars, and raised places that offer refuge above the shallow water. In the Coorong Saline Wetlands, small islands, bars, and higher flats can become important resting and nesting places for birds when conditions are suitable. They may be low, simple forms, barely raised above surrounding water or mud. Yet their elevation matters. A few centimeters can separate wet from dry, accessible from isolated, exposed from protected. The wetland's smallest heights can hold great importance. You can see one in the distance as a pale shape against darker water. Pelicans may rest there, or other birds may gather along its edge. The surface may be sand, shell, mud, or vegetation, depending on location and season. Water moves around it slowly. Wind touches it from all sides. It looks almost temporary, as if the lagoon has lifted one hand above the surface. For nesting birds, these raised places can offer separation from some disturbances and predators, though their usefulness depends on water levels, stability, and surrounding conditions. If water is too low, access may change. If water is too high, nests may be affected. If disturbance is too frequent, birds may not settle. Again, the Coorong shows how ecological value can depend on delicate timing and height. The islands also alter the feel of open water. They give the eye a place to rest. They break the reflection. They create lee sides where water may be calmer. They collect feathers, shells, droppings, plant material, and cracks. Over time, even a small bar becomes part of nutrient movement and habitat complexity. Nothing in a wetland is merely a spot on a map. At sunset, an island with resting birds can look dreamlike. White bodies against darkening water, long reflections, the faint sound of preening and shifting. A few birds stand, then settle again. The air smells of salt and cooling mud. The sky lowers its colors into the lagoon. You can watch without needing to approach, letting distance preserve the quiet. There is wisdom in that distance. Some places are most beautiful when left undisturbed. The Coorong's resting birds do not need our closeness. They need space, water, food, and time. The listener, too, may feel the relief of being allowed distance from the demands of the day. Not everything must be entered. Some things may be held gently in view. The strangeness of the Coorong includes these small refuges within exposure. In a wide open lagoon, a low island can become shelter. In a salty basin, a slightly raised bar can become a gathering place. In a flat landscape, tiny relief matters. The wetland teaches a quiet geometry of survival without turning it into danger, simply showing how life uses the faintest differences. As night comes down, the island becomes a darker shape. The birds become pale suggestions. The water around it moves softly. Above, stars appear again. The lagoon holds the island the way sleep holds a thought, lightly, with room around it. Nothing concludes. The scene remains available, steady and soft. And as we leave the island in the dimness, we follow the shoreline toward places where reeds and fresher influences make the Coorong feel slightly less saline, though still deeply its own. In some northern or more sheltered parts of the Coorong system, reeds and other emergent plants can suggest fresher or less saline conditions. Their vertical stems change the landscape's texture. After long stretches of low salt marsh and open flats, reeds feel like a soft screen, rustling in wind and holding shadows. They gather sound differently, making the edge of the lagoon feel more enclosed and intimate. Reeds can slow water, trap sediment, and provide habitat for insects, small birds, and other wetland life. Their roots and stems interact with mud and oxygen in complex ways. They may mark places where salinity is lower, groundwater influence differs, or water stays fresh enough for their tolerance. The Coorong is not uniformly salty everywhere. It contains transitions, and reeds are one sign of transition. You can imagine approaching a reed-fringed edge at dusk. The stems stand taller than the samphire, moving together with a dry, papery sound. The smell is greener, less purely mineral. Water gathers in shadow among the stems. A small bird moves inside the reeds, heard more than seen. The lagoon beyond remains open, but here the margin feels hushed in a different way. This variety matters for biodiversity. Different plants create different structures, and different structures support different animals. Open mud suits probing shorebirds. Submerged plants suit small aquatic communities. Salt marsh suits salt-tolerant insects and edge life. Reeds offer cover and vertical habitat. The Coorong's strangeness is not monotony. It is a long sequence of habitats arranged by water, salt, and shelter. Where fresher influence appears, the contrast with hypersaline reaches becomes clearer. One end of the system may support species that cannot persist farther south. Another may hold salt-adapted communities that would not dominate in fresher areas. Between them lies a shifting middle. To move along the Coorong is to move along a biological gradient, though the journey remains low, quiet, and unhurried. The reeds also change how light enters the wetland. In open flats, light spreads broadly. Among reeds, it breaks into lines and shadows. Reflections become striped. Wind becomes visible as waves of bending stems. Birds vanish and reappear. The listener's mind can move between openness and enclosure, between wide water and narrow rustle, without leaving the same saline landscape. At night, reeds sound especially close. Their leaves touch and separate. Water laps at their bases. Insects may call from within them. The darkness between stems feels deeper than the open dark above the lagoon. Yet the mood remains calm. This is not a hidden place of fear, but a sheltered margin, one of the wetland's quieter rooms. The Coorong saline wetlands are strange because they can hold such rooms within a landscape that first seems sparse. The longer we follow the shore, the more chambers appear. Salt marsh room, mudflat room, reed room, dune room, open water room, temporary pool room, hypersaline basin room. None has walls, yet each has its own temperature, smell, sound, and pace. And as we pass from the reed room back into open water, the night becomes clear enough for stars to return across the lagoon's dark surface. Stars over the Coorong can feel unusually close because the land is so low. The horizon does not compete with the sky. The lagoon reflects what it can, breaking some points of light into trembling lines. Where the water is still, a star may appear both above and below. Where ripples pass, it dissolves and reforms. The wetland becomes a quiet instrument for darkness. The scientific story of this reflection is simple, but the feeling is deep. Light travels from distant stars, meets the surface of shallow saline water, and enters the eye after touching a landscape of mud, salt, and bird tracks. The same water that holds algae and invertebrates also holds a brief image of space. The Coorong's shallow surface becomes a meeting point of the very near and the unimaginably far. You may notice how the stars soften the wetland's strangeness. In daylight, salinity, drought marks, and pale crusts may seem stark. Under stars, those same features become quiet tones in a larger dark. The salt edges glow faintly, the dunes lower themselves into shadow, birds become resting shapes. The lagoon loses its glare and becomes receptive, as if night has made it easier for the place to rest. Nocturnal cooling changes the wetland physically. Air temperature falls. Shallow water cools more quickly than deep water would. Dew may form if conditions allow. Winds may ease or shift. Animals adjust their behavior. Microbial processes continue. The night is not a pause in ecology. It is another set of conditions, quieter to our senses, but active in the wetland's chemistry and life. You can let the coolness reach the skin in imagination. The day's heat has gone from the sand. The air has a fine edge. The smell of salt is clean, almost crystalline. Mud holds a deeper damp scent near the waterline. The sound of surf remains beyond the dunes, but it feels farther away now, folded into the dark. Your breath slows with the cold. The Coorong at night also reveals the comfort of being unobserved. Much of its life continues without spectacle. Birds rest, small animals move, plants respire, water cools, salts remain, no audience is required. The wetland does not brighten itself for us, it simply exists in its own cycles, and that indifference can feel profoundly peaceful to a tired mind. In darkness, the reason for calling the Coorong strange becomes less intellectual and more bodily. You feel it in the closeness of the sea beyond sand, in the brine beside your feet, in the flatness that still contains so many hidden processes, in the wide sky reflected by water only a little deeper than a footprint. The place is ordinary in materials and extraordinary in arrangement. This is often how geological wonders work. They are made of common things under uncommon conditions. Sand, water, salt, wind, plants, mud, birds, and light. None is rare alone. Together, in this long coastal lagoon at the end of a great river system, they form something difficult to simplify. The Coorong Saline Wetlands are strange because they are a precise gathering of ordinary elements. And as the stars continue trembling on the water, we drift toward the early hours, when the wetland seems to belong entirely to slow processes and sleeping birds. In the early hours, before the first paling of dawn, the Coorong Saline Wetlands may feel almost suspended. The day's winds have eased. The water has darkened into a low shine. Birds rest in groups or alone, shaped more by silhouette than detail. The dunes are quiet. The salt marsh holds its scent close to the ground. Even the ocean beyond the sand seems softened by distance. This hour belongs to processes that do not need light to continue. Water still exchanges heat with air. Salts remain dissolved or crystallized according to moisture. Microbes keep breaking down organic matter. Animals breathe and adjust. Groundwater moves below the surface. The whole wetland continues, but without the visual brightness that makes us want to analyze it. Darkness allows the system to become felt. You can imagine sitting near the lagoon without moving much. The sand beneath you is cool. Your hands rest quietly. The smell of brine comes and goes with the breeze. Somewhere a bird shifts, making a small sound and then none. A ripple touches the edge. The stars remain overhead. There is no reason to hurry toward morning. The Coorong knows how to wait. Waiting here is an ecological act. Seeds wait. Eggs wait. Birds wait for feeding light. Plants wait for suitable water levels. The mouth waits on flow and sand movement. The lagoon waits on rain, river, wind, and season. But waiting is not passive emptiness. It is readiness held in a quieter form. The wetland's patience is one of its deepest forms of life. This patience helps explain why the Coorong can feel so calming despite its complexity. Nothing in it has to be understood all at once. Each process can arrive slowly. Salt, sand, wind, river, bird, plant, mud, light. You can receive one, then let it fade, then receive another. The landscape itself gives permission for knowledge to come in waves. The early hours also blur the difference between water and land. In low light, a damp flat can look like lagoon. A shallow pool can look like shadow. Salt crust can look like moonlit water. The dunes can look like cloud. Edges soften. The mind follows them, losing some of its own hard separations. The Coorong becomes a place where categories loosen without falling apart. There is rest in loosened categories. You do not have to decide whether you are fully awake or asleep. You can be like the brackish water near the mouth, mixed and gentle. You can be like the salt marsh, half land and half water. You can be like the temporary basin, quiet now but still part of the living system. The wetland receives in-between states with ease. As the hours pass, a faint change begins in the east. Though it is not yet dawn, the darkness lifts by a single shade. The lagoon remains mostly hidden, but the outline of the opposite shore returns. A bird calls once, very softly. The sound travels over the water and disappears. The Coorong has carried us through another layer of night without asking anything in return. And as that first faint light approaches, we move again into the scientific tenderness of thresholds, because this wetland is made of lines that are never as sharp as they appear. Thresholds are what remain as the Coorong grows quieter. The line between water and land softens under the last dim light. The line between river and sea rests somewhere inside the darkened lagoon. The line between salt and freshness becomes impossible to see, though every plant, bird, shell, and grain of mud still feels it in its own way. You are no longer trying to follow all of it. You are simply resting beside the water. The air cools until it seems to have a gentle weight. Salt lies pale along the margins, and the mud holds a low damp scent beneath the night. The dunes are only a shadow now, keeping the ocean's long breath softened beyond the sand. A few birds settle into themselves, their bodies folded into the darkness. The lagoon barely moves. It only gathers the sky, loosens it into ripples, and lets it go again. Under the shallow surface, the fine sediment waits, as it has waited through heat, rain, wind, and the slow return of water. Tiny lives continue in the mud. Roots hold where they can. Salt remains where evaporation has left it. Nothing here is finished in a loud way, and nothing needs to be. The Coorong saline wetlands keep their strange calm by changing slowly, almost invisibly, while the night lays its cool hand over everything. You can let yourself become as quiet as the lagoon now, held between shore and sky, between waking and sleep. Far beyond the dunes, the southern ocean continues its patient breathing, but here the water is still, the salt is pale, and the soft dark of the Coorong asks nothing more of you.